Damn! Last video's comment section is worse than the warp. Seems showing the true colors of other lore YouTubers makes people very angry, which makes the whole thing even more entertaining. Oh good, you're here, Pio, and already in a fitting costume. Did you read the new script for once, seeing as you dressed up as a Steel Legionnaire today?
Oh yeah, it's certainly for the new video that I'm dressed like this. No other reason at all.
Great! Then we can start on time for once.
Sure, just give me a minute. I forgot to eat my morning Pio starch ration. Change of program, guys. We aren't going to march to invade the Martial colony of Brazil under control of El Presidente Servo Pio. Instead, we are going to Armageddon, it seems. War will have to wait a bit more. Are you for real?
Mamma mia!
I spent all night studying maps of Martians for
I've
this
already
mission.
packed the Ghazghkull.
Damn it! I was ready to execute Pio 73 to keep morale in check.
Armageddon, a world whose name is known across the Imperium. Armageddon, a world whose name has become a byword for war and destruction on a massive scale. Armageddon, where the fate of 1,000 worlds hangs in the balance. Tell me again why you decided to use the cloning machine and clone yourself to make this small battle group?
Additional protection.
Protection from what?
We are going to talk about the wars for Armageddon, so you know, orcs, demons, heretics, IRS agents. You may never know what horrors lay on that planet.
As usual, I want to thank all the members of the channel, the supporters on Patreon, and our Discord members for all their support and help. And I want to give a special welcome to the people that subscribed to the channel after last video. There is many new people, so thank you for giving us a chance even if the video itself sparked controversy. Now, a little word of warning before starting the video. The 4 wars we're talking about in this video are very specific. We won't speak about the War of the Beast, because removing that it involved Armageddon very minimally, that series of books is a travesty on canon that I categorically refuse to read, so know that it won't be included in this video, if not for some specific bits that are important. And while we will also talk about the new conflict for Armageddon that is happening in recent 40k lore, it is still not counted in the 4 wars mentioned in the title. In fact, in this video we will cover the first, second, and third war for Armageddon. But then what is the 4th war for Armageddon? Well, you see, there was a war fought on Armageddon that preceded all others. It was a war that included one of the biggest deployment of forces ever needed by humanity to defeat a single threat. It was a war fought when the planet was not yet known as Armageddon. In fact, at the time, it was known with the name of Ullanor. Now, even here, keep something in mind. The Ullanor Crusade is one of the biggest messes of scattered lore in the entirety of the 40k setting. As usual, me and the others have tried to put all the sources in order to create a timeline and correct series of events. But seeing as even the wikis don't have the full collection of sources listed under their articles of the Crusade, to the point that we found a few that are not listed anywhere we looked, know that we did our best to find and research all material for this crusade. But if you find sources we missed with even more info, let us know. Not to say what we're going to narrate is unreliable or wrong, we still did all the research we could. It's just in case we missed something. Now you know why we missed it. And just to make you understand how fractured the lore around this war is, Lexicanum lists the main date of when the war took place, which is 000M31, and gives us the source of this claim, the Horus Heresy Book 3 Extermination, page 19. But if you actually go and check that book at that specific page, not only you don't find the date they are sourcing, but you don't find mentions of the Ullanor Crusade period. And it is a mistake that is actually worse in the official wiki, that lists the crusade as taking place in 000M30. The problem with that date is that the Great Crusade had not even started at that point, as the timeline of the Great Crusade is from around 798 M30 to 005 M31. So we have 2 different wikis, 2 different days of which one is completely impossible, and the one that is actually possible isn't written in the source provided for it. In fact, the date of 000M31 is the date of the end of the Ullanor Crusade, and by definition, the end of the Great Crusade. And it is a date that is instead found in the 6th Black Book of the Horus Heresy, Retribution, at page 28.
I am already confused that we haven't even started.
But let's leave that for the end of the Ullanor Crusade section. Time to get into lore. The Ullanor Crusade was the final official campaign undertaken in the Great Crusade. It was a military operation that aimed at stopping and shattering the orc forces of Overlord Uruk that were gathering at the sector of Ullanor. Uruk was the war boss of the biggest orc empire in the entire galaxy in that period of imperial conquest. And the Ullanor campaign would be the last official campaign that was led by the Emperor of Mankind before he relinquished command of his forces to Horus Lupercal.
The great mass of the Xenos had threatened to break open the new bonds forged by the Great Crusade. And so a cohort of warriors from across the noble legions came together to shatter this threat before it could spread beyond the sector, where the green tide rose with each passing day. Under the command of Horus, the Lunar Wolves took the fight to the heart of Urg's war machine.
Now, once again keep in mind that we do not have very clear info on how the war went. Just sparse fragments of information about who took part in it and how it went. What everyone can be sure of, though, is that the war was extremely vicious and brutal, to the point that the Imperium had to once again deploy hundreds of thousands of Space Marines and different Primarchs just to defeat the Orcs of Ullanor, like they had to do during the infamous and secretive Rangdan genocides. While the specific battles are a mystery to us, what we do know is that the main forces deployed against Ullanor had elements of the Lunar Wolves, with Horus himself at the command of the campaign, the Ultramarines, with Robute Gilliman at their head, and the White Scars, with Jagatai Khan in command. The deployment by itself was formidable, but if I have to give my honest opinion about it, the number of human soldiers deployed in the Ullanor Crusade is laughably low. As we get some insight on the military logistics of the conquest in the second book of the Horus Heresy, False Gods.
This, said Horus, this is nothing. At Ullanor, 600 vessels anchored above the planet of the Greenskin. My entire legion went to war that day, girl. We covered the land with our soldiers. Over 2 million army soldiers, 100 titans of the Mechanicum, and all the slaves we freed from the Greenskin labor camps. Did any other legions fight on Ullanor? Gilliman and the Khan. Their legions helped clear the outer system with diversionary attacks, but my warriors won the day. The best of the best, slogging through blood and dirt. It was I who led the Justirian spear tip to final victory. It must have been incredible. It was, agreed Horus. Only Abaddon and I walked away from the fight against the Greenskin warlord. He was a tough bastard, but I illuminated him and then threw his body from the highest tower.
I suppose the Great Beast was a sort of descendant of that one war boss that Horus threw from a tower. Remember that? Truly an inspiring moment.
The biggest picture ever painted of how the war was fought can be found in the 4th Index Astartes book, published in 2004.
The Ullanor Crusade. The Ullanor sector was the domain of Orc Overlord Uruk. His empire was founded on dozens of conquered and enslaved human planets. Knowing the Orcs' love for battle, the War Master tactics were to lure the Greenskin forces away from his real targets. Other Space Marine legions were tasked to retake the outlying planets, supported by newly raised Imperial Guard regiments. As the Orc armadas moved out to resist this invasion, the Lunar Wolves fleet drove straight to the central system. As the Orc armadas moved out to resist this invasion, the Lunar Wolves fleet drove straight for the central system. Drop pods crashed to the ground all around Ulak's fortress palace. Heavy shuttles deployed land raiders and predators, and armored space marines advanced on the defenses. Then, as hundreds of orcs rushed to join the battle on the perimeter walls, Horus and the entire Terminator armored First Company teleported directly to the foot of the great central tower. As the Lunar Wolves blasted away the guards, mobs from the walls raced back to protect Uruk. Horus left most of the Terminators to hold back the Orcs and pushed on up the towers with just 10 Space Marines at his side. At the pinnacle of the tower, they found Uruk in a grand chamber, accompanied by 40 of the biggest Orcs in his empire. Horus charged straight into the midst of the knobs, slashing apart the muscle grim bodies with the twin lightning claws of his battle armor. The Terminators with him will not fire into the melee for fear of hitting their beloved Primarch, so they too crashed into the combat. Slowly they hacked a path through the mob until Horus faced Uruk himself. The Overlord was an enormous orc, but he was simply no match for the Primarch's skill and unnatural power. First crippling his enemy, Horus hefted Urlak's broken body out onto the roof and threw it screaming from the battlements to fall far below amongst the horde of orcs still assaulting the lower levels. The sudden demise of their mighty leader sent a panic through the greenskin forces, which started to fall back from the Terminators. But the fleeing mobs found they had nowhere to run, as the outer walls had been breached by the attacking lunar wolves, and the day turned into a slaughter. Back in the Overlord's chamber, Horus found every Orc and Terminator dead, apart from the gore-drenched captain of the First Company, Abaddon, surrounded by crushed and broken bodies. As word of his death spread, the Overlord's empire fragmented. The Imperial forces were able to destroy or drive out the remaining Orcs and free the Quadrant for Imperial rule within a year. Naturally, the Lunar Wolves claimed to have liberated substantially more worlds than their allies.
But even if the victory was relatively swift for a campaign of this caliber, the aftermath of it was anything but. The destruction of the Overlord of the Orcs on Ullanor led the Orc forces to splinter and separate, to the point that an entire separate campaign had to be undertaken just to purge them out of the nearby planets and systems once and for all.
Some say that the triumph at Ullanor began with the echo of the first shot fired against the greenskin hordes of the Overlord Uruk. Others that it was marked by the bloodshed when Horus Lupercal pitched the monstrous alien from the balcony of the Great Keep to die broken against the flagstones far below. In the end, it was only the victory that mattered, and the hard-fought road the millions of soldiers and hundreds of thousands of legionnaires had cut into the art of the Orc onslaught. Under the command of Horus, the Lunar Wolves took the fight to the heart of Urg's war machine, blinding the alien army with a massive feint. Even as his father, the Emperor, led the common soldier in phalanxes of Titan battle walkers across Ullanor Majoris, it was Horus who struck the killing blow. With Urg's termination, the nascent Orc Empire self-destructed, and the Xenos that were not hounded into the mud of Ullanor's vast battlegrounds will be hunted down across hundreds of star systems, all the way to Kondax, the Kaivas Belt and beyond. By the Emperor's command, Ullanor was remade as a trophy world, designated Mundus Tropium on all galactic maps and records of Tithe. It would be a sight of glory and spectacle to cement not only the single conquest over the forces ranged against humankind, but a greater symbol of the Crusade itself. For 200 Terran years, the Emperor's mighty endeavor had moved across the face of the galaxy to bring unity and illumination to the lost daughter worlds of old Earth. It had pushed back the night, reforged all links between civilization, battled alien threats, and with great regret, it had often given punishment. A change was coming though, a change that found its fulcrum on Ullanor. None who walked upon that world knew that the echo of that triumph would sound for decades, for centuries, for millennia.
Ullanor was declared a trophy world. A great number of Mechanicus machines and terraforming equipment would be brought to the planet to reforge it from a desolate wasteland of death to a monument of conquest for the Imperium of Men. What would have required centuries to do normally was done in months, and the planet became a splendor to behold, where the biggest victory parade ever hosted by the Imperium of Men would take place.
When the Mechanicum were finished, the honored came to pay homage to the battle won, the Crusade's ideal and the one who was father to them all. The Imperial Army and the Titan Legions bracketed the gathering. Human troops were ranked in uncountable numbers, their hosts so wide they became a sea of battle armor and dress uniforms. Every common man and woman who stood on Ullanor soil that day had been selected for their valor and conduct. And until the day they died, each would have the singular honor of wearing the onyx and gold triumph bar upon their uniforms. The award was forged from bolt shells recovered from the field and melted down. Ranged around them, the great war machines of the Collegia Titanica towered towards a sky cut to ribbons by the contrails of 1,000 aerospace fighters, and above those, high over the thin white cirrus clouds of Ullanor's day, warships moved as low as they dared through the upper atmosphere, washes of interface heat rolling off their void shields as they showed their flanks in a gesture of renewed fealty. Then the Legionnaires. Of all the Emperor's gene-enhanced brigades, a full 14 of the Legion stood represented at Ullanor, and with them came 9 beings of inimitable power and majesty, 9 gods and angels made flesh, the primarchs of the greatest armies ever created by human hands. Mortarion, the Reaper of Men and Master of the Death Guard, cowled and lethal in aspect, matched by the warrior guardians of his death shroud. The Phoenician Fulgrim, resplendent in his finery and handsome in aspect, lit by the reflection of gold and platinum. Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, the Lord of Unknown, his soul as much a mystery to the common world as the workings of the warp and the ghosts within it. Lorgar Aurelian, the quiet and brooding zealot who burned with such intensity and buried it all deep in his heart, saying little and standing watchful. His polar opposite was Angron, the gladiator lord and son of grief, never able to settle or moderate his seething endless fury, always on the verge of outburst and violence. Dawn, the stalwart man of stone, the imperial feast with his unwavering mana and unbreakable focus, the one who would always obey, always ready for duty. The Khan, his fur-trimmed robes and ornate armor detailed with 1,000 narratives of the White Scars Legion, his every step across the land a challenge to the galaxy. Then Sanguinius of the Blood Angels, flanked by the golden-armored honored detail of the Sanguinary Guard, his mighty wings folded back across his battle plate, his face turned to the sky to welcome the impossible, majestic sight before them. Horus Lupercal, of course. Horus of the Lunar Wars, the hero of Ullanor, liberator and first among equals. Horus, who was to be given the new honor of a title above and beyond any that had been bestowed before. A title, it could be said, that will forever carry the echo of his name.
After Horus was crowned War Master on Ullanor, for all the following events, the designation of the planet will not change. Not during the Horus Heresy, nor after. And now, let's deal with the problems we found on Lexicanum before moving on. Removing the problem of the source listing with the date of the Crusade, there is also some stuff that during research we found to be wrong on the Lexicanum page of the Ullanor Crusade. First and foremost, there are a couple of problems with the forces listed on the side of the Imperium. While the number of Space Marines is not contradicted anywhere, nor are contradicted the legions that took part in the campaign, the number of human soldiers is actually wrong on two different counts. The Lexicanum page lists 8 million Imperial Army troops deployed in the campaign, but no, the only source showing a number of soldiers in deployment on Ullanor is the novel of False Gods. And as Giulio already read, it lists 2 million soldiers, not 8 million soldiers. But once again, info on this campaign are scattered everywhere, so I am adding a mistake for now. If somebody finds the original source, because once again, many are not listed on the wikis and we had to find them ourselves for research, they can let me know and I will remove the mistake. But for now, we only have 2 millions. This problem is compounded again in the section about the Ullanor Triumph. As there it is listed that 8 million Imperial Army soldiers are marching in the parade. But by the sources provided by this same page, the only one that mentions this is the Book of Fear to Tread. But the book mentions that uncountable Imperial Guard soldiers are marching. It doesn't give a specific number. And the last problem we noticed is with the Titans deployed in the war. Now, once again, the sources are a mess. But in this case, even if the correct source is found, because the ones listed don't mention it, this mistake will still stand. As the Lexicanum page lists that the 100 Titans were of Legio Mortis, when by sources provided by both inside this page and outside of it, there wasn't only Legio Mortis fighting on Ullanor. There was also Legio Griffonicus, Legio Atarus, and Legio Ignatum. The sources are so lacking that I am not sure Legio Mortis was there at all, in fact.
But wait, how did Ullanor become Armageddon exactly?
Glad you asked, Pio.
I am following the script.
Quiet now. The answer to that question is simple, but also extremely complicated by itself. And unfortunately, it is an answer found in one of the biggest travesties to canon ever written, the book series of the War of the Beast. During the War of the Beast, the war boss aptly named the Beast made Ullanor pretty much his capital during the war he had started. When the efforts of Imperial forces focused on reaching Ullanor to kill the Beast, the planet became once again a giant battlefield between the Imperium and the Orcs. In the final book of the Beast Arises series, aptly named The Beheading, we learn that by using the teleporting technology created by the Orcs, that used subspace teleportation instead of warp travel, the Mechanicus decided, instead of destroying the planet like it was planned, to instead teleport it away in the Armageddon system, to plunder it of its riches and technologies.
Isolde, good to see you. Tell me now, can I believe what I just saw?
Regretfully no, Grandmaster, she said. They lied. They moved it, not destroyed it. They're going to plunder it.
Vangerich looked away. Stupid, he said. When he looked back, his eyes were hard. Where is Ullanor now?
I don't exactly know. I've got the name and the stellar signifier. The code puts it on the edge of the segmentum solar, and if it's named, it'll be on a chart somewhere. It did have 9 worlds, orbiting a main sequence yellow star not unlike Sol. The code is for an uninhabited system marked for colonization. They got quite agitated about moving Ullanor at exactly the right moment to displace the existing 4th world safely, a place called Kozin, so I don't know if that's of any worth as a planet. I can't tell you any more than what I gleaned through eavesdropping. The ship has its data core encrypted so heavily, it'd take a Venus acolyte a week to get into it. I don't have the skills. I can't explode to you. Verbal report only.
After being stripped of all that was of interest to the Mechanicus, the planet was left barren. It would later be colonized by the Imperium and aptly named Armageddon, the capital planet of the Armageddon system, in Segmentum Solar. The colonists and the wider Imperium remained ignorant that the planet of Armageddon was in reality the planet of Ullanor. And with all of this established, we can move on to the first true war for Armageddon. So, the first war for Armageddon was... Wait, PO-57 died?
Yeah, he did well recover at the last war.
How?
He was hit on the head by the orc Horus threw from the balcony.
I'll get Joy to take him to the PO Starch refinery. The first war for Armageddon is a war that technically was wiped away from Imperial records by the faction of the Inquisition. In-universe, the first war for Armageddon was the first war against the forces of Orc war boss Ghazghkull Uruk Thraka. But the true first war for Armageddon is a lot darker in nature, as it wasn't fought against the Orcs, but against the forces of Chaos. And to be extremely specific, it was a war fought against the forces of the Blood God Khorne, led by none other than the corrupted lord of the 12th Legion, or if we want to use his colloquial name, Demon Primarch Angron. For those that don't know him, Angron, also known with the title of the Red Angel, was the Primarch of the 12th Legion of the Legionis Astartes, the Warhounds, that under his leadership became the World Eaters. Angron, like all other Primarchs, was sent into the warp while still in his gestation pod as a toddler. He landed on a planet known as Nuceria, where he was taken as a slave and forced into gladiatorial arenas as a pit fighter. He grew in an harsh and violent environment, but his brutal nature was brought on when he was implanted with a type of technology known as the Butcher Nails. The Butcher Nails are a remnant of Dark Age of technology tech. They are not literal nails. They are a complete replacement of a section of the brain of Primarch Angron that robbed him pretty much of any kind of emotions other than rage and anger. The nails work pretty much as a torture device, keeping the bearer in pain and constantly on the verge of a psychotic outburst, and let the person that is implanted with them find some peace and tranquility only in the middle of brutal battles and merciless slaughter. The World Eaters were also implanted with a similar device to the Butcher Nails that they fashioned after being reunited with Angron to be closer to their Primarch, before he himself ordered the entire Legion to be implanted with them. If it wasn't obvious enough, Angron and the World Eaters took the side of the traitors during the Horus Heresy, and by the end of it they became the servants of the Chaos God Khorne, the Blood God, with Angron becoming a fully fledged demon Primarch of Khorne. Now, before going to the story of the first war for Armageddon, I just want to warn you that this war, like probably all others, has fragmented sources that sometimes conflict with each others, especially White Dwarf 279. That tells a completely different story than the one presented in other sources, and especially the main source for what happened on the battlefield of the war, which is the novel The Emperor's Gift. But removing that, the story is almost always presented in the same way. First thing first, let's present to everyone the planet of Armageddon.
A factory world of incredible size and output. Armageddon was and still is the keystone of an entire imperial sector. As with all industrialized worlds, it teems with billions of souls that scrape a torrid living from the infected grease and rotting steel of the hives. Each man, woman and child fighting to breathe the same toxic air. Unrest is common upon such a world. Demagogues rail against the status quo, and mutants and heretics make their webs of deceit in the shadows. During the 3rd century of the 41st millennium, the seeds of rebellion had taken root so firmly upon Armageddon that the whole planet was as ripe as a bloodfruit, ready to be devoured by the dread forces of chaos. If Armageddon citizens knew the hell that was to come, they would have cherished every fume-choked hour of their miserable existence.
It is the year 444 and 41. The planet of Armageddon is at the moment suffering an uprising. Rebellions had been happening all around the planet and inside its 5 cities. But they were nothing that the planetary defense forces of the Steel Legion couldn't deal with. In fact, technically the fighting of the first war for Armageddon has started months before the arrival of the legions of the Blood God. In the words of Grimnar himself, the rebellion was a significant but pathetic heresy. But entire sectors of the 5 cities had rose into rebellion all at once. And to put it simply, this was too coordinated to be a coincidence, especially for what came soon after. The turmoils of the warp started manifesting, making it impossible for astropaths to communicate with the wider Imperium from the planet, and masking the approach of an extreme danger. A giant space hulk, officially designated as the Devourer of Stars, appeared in real space in the Armageddon system, carrying with itself endless legions of heretics, mutants, abominations, chaos marines, and especially the fallen son of the Emperor, Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters. After dealing with the planet's orbital defenses and defense fleet, the endless horrors of the Space Hulk made planetfall on the planet of Armageddon, including Angron himself with his warbands of Khorne berserkers. At the same time as this was happening, half of the Armageddon Steel Legion forces present on the planet joined the side of the traitors.
The recently uncovered memoirs of Lord General Gustav Karlsson II record that nearly half the planetary defense force turned on their fellows, their ranks swollen by hordes of cultists. Karlsson, Chief of Staff of the Armageddon Secundus Command God, reacted with swift and unforgiving efficiency, eliminating those units he could not absolutely rely on. His counterpart on Armageddon Prime was slower to react, and fought in vain to regain control as anarchy and mayhem swept through the hives of Armageddon Prime. Where the defenders should have been able to mount a well-prepared defense, the trench line and bastions were the site of vicious battles between erstwhile brethren-in-arms.
In less than a week, the entirety of the planet had become a violent war zone, especially in the territory of Armageddon Prime, where every hive was now a battlefield between the forces staying loyal to the Imperium and the endless hordes of cultists, demons, and chaos marines of the Blood God. The death toll swiftly rose to millions of victims as demons rampaged through the factory and hub districts, and renegades unleashed their feral wrath upon the innocent civilians of the now burning hive cities. Unknowingly to the invaders, the planet had been able to relay a broad distress signal before the invasion had commenced. Distress signal that had been picked up by the Space Wolves, and their newly elected chapter master, Logan Grimnar. Learning of the nature of the invasion, Grimnar had petitioned the inquisitorial forces of the Ordo Malleus for aid. And when the Ordo Malleus learned that this was not only a full-fledged chaos invasion, but that the forces of the archenemy were being led by Demon Primarch Angron, they immediately dispatched a ragged company of Grey Knights, formed from squads of Grey Knights all coming from different brotherhoods, ordering them and an inquisitorial cohort to immediately reach Armageddon and join the Imperial forces in the defense of the planet. When Grimnar and his Space Wolves reached Armageddon, Hive Volcanoes, Hive Deathmire, and Hive Tempestora had already completely fallen. The entirety of the continent of Armageddon Prime had already been conquered by the forces of Angron, and the few remaining defenders had to flee through the equatorial jungle to the continent of Armageddon Secundus. There, the rebellion had been thwarted, and the distance between their hives, namely Hive Elsrich and Hive Hades, had made it hard for the rebels to gain any foothold. The Space Wolves and the defenders of Armageddon Secundus were ready to fight at the equatorial jungle when the enemy reached them, but that battle, strangely enough, never came. After the conquest of Armageddon Prime, Angron delayed his advance to build monuments to the Blood God. Piles of bones, skulls, entire towers of corpses. The energies of chaos he unleashed started even influencing the jungle itself and the defenders in it. Nobody knows what caused this delay. The main theory presented is that the warp energies hitting Armageddon weren't as strong as when Angron arrived, and him and his legions needed to perform rituals and incantations to be able to exist in reality and continue the invasion. But nobody knows for sure. This delay gave time to the forces in the equatorial jungle to entrench, and the Grey Knights the time to arrive on the surface of the planet. Grimnar will meet with these Grey Knight forces, and made a deal with them to keep the fight out of Hive Elsrich and Hive Infernus. He knew what was the destiny of those that saw a demon or a Grey Knight, and decided that even if him and the wolves had to fight at a disadvantage in the wastes of the planet, that it was a disadvantage worth accepting if it would protect the lives of the people they were fighting to save. He told the Grey Knights to await in orbit for his order to deploy, as they would have to strike at the heart of the enemy forces to win. At that point, the chosen territories of battle to stop Angron and his legions were two rivers, the River Chiron and the River Styx. The assault would come less than a day later. At the River Chiron, the Space Wolves, outnumbered almost 1,000 to 1, took the fight directly to the Chaos Horde. Grimnar led an armored assault straight across the river at its lower point and onward towards the World Eater's Chaos Space Marines charging from the jungle, engaging them briefly and taking a heavy toll before falling back in good order. The frenzied Chaos Horde raced after the armored assault, pitching into the River Chiron in headlong pursuit. As soon as Grimnar's men had reached the far bank and disembarked from their transports, the old wolf gave a great howl that cut through the cacophonous screaming of the Chaos armies. The slaughter that followed was spectacular. The river came alive with devastating explosions as the tanks of the Imperial Guard rumbled into view and unleashed all of their weapons on the advancing Chaos Horde. Massed fire rained into the Chaos scum that floundered in the poisonous waters of the Chiron as disciplined ranks of guardsmen took up firing positions. Upon the banks, 100 Space Wolves stood green-faced as they blew apart those renegades that made it to the other side with interlacing volleys of bolter fire. Where the Chaos lines were thickest, the Space Wolves waded into the river itself and set about them with Frost Axe and Thunderhammer. This violent battle went on for several hours, until the river was choked with the corpses of the invaders. The tattered remnants of the blood-crazed horde at that point hesitated, floundered, and then broke. But the worst was yet to come. To the west, following the river Styx, Angron himself led an attack aimed at breaching and invading High Velstrich and Infernos. A horde of crazed corn berserkers, heretics, mutants and demons of the Blood God followed in his wake, together with his own personal bodyguards, 12 bloodthirsters, greater demons of Khorne. Entire companies of World Eater's berserkers butchered their way through the defense lines, followed by Angron and his legions of demons. Nothing could stop their rampage, not even the help of the Space Wolves or the Inquisitorial forces deployed on the ground. But this was all a trap. As Grimnar lured the Demon Primarch and his forces deeper in the battle lines, he gave the signal that the Grey Knights had long awaited. And 109 Grey Knights, awaiting in the teleportarium of their battle barge, all fitted with Terminator armors and Nemesis weapons, teleported in the center of the Horde to reach Angron himself.
That day we faced 12. The crew of Praetoria, the 12 strongest. The 12 demons whose lives and deeds must please their wretched blood god over 40,000 years of warfare. They came on despite the Aegis. They came because of it. It was nothing to them, less than a joke, a mere irritant that pulled at their attention. Every one of them had thousands of heresies etched under its name in the great libraries of our monastery. We were looking at the history of warfare in physical form. These beasts spearheaded the main hosts, at their foul sire's side, Angron. To think such a creature had ever borne a human name. Was this truly one of the Emperor's own sons, infected by unholiness at the Imperium's dawn? The passing of enough time will make all things myth. No one, even among our order, knew which ancient secrets were once fact and which were misguided fiction. It rivaled a Warhound-class Vulcan in size, standing even above the beast lords that served as its bodyguards. Chains and cables dreadlocked from its Aryan skull, and from the clawed tips of its dripping wings to the ridged, stinking red iron that served as its skin, it had long since surrendered any claims to humanity. When it roared, which it did at the moment its army began to crumble and tumble above its booted feet, it made the strained, throaty whine of an enraged mammoth. The sound carried across the sky, curdling the clouds above. Lightning split the heavens. The storm began a second later. It was raining blood, making a ruins of the parchments and scrolls fixed to an armor, stealing the polished shine of our holy ceramite. The rain buzzed and fizzed along the powered edges of our weapons. Justi Circassian's skull, enshrined in gold, seemed almost to shatter as my stave's energy field superheated the red rain into steam. 6 seconds had passed since our arrival. Just 6 seconds, we were already running, already closing the circle with a garrote's intent. 109 knights charged in perfect unity and in perfect silence. The sensation of our powers rising before release was no different from the way air turns cold and dances with ozone in the seconds before a storm.
At that point, Grimnar and the Space Wolves commenced a counterattack against the forces of Angron, and charged into the mist as the enemy was distracted with the entire company of Grey Knights that had teleported in their midst. A battle erupted immediately. The Grey Knights were running on the battleground to reach Angron, cutting down everything they found on their path. Demons, heretics, corn berserkers. They could feel other Grey Knights dying around them as they did so. They knew that probably none of them would come back alive from this assault. But they didn't care. They had to stop Angron. Angron. They had to stop chaos before it could envelop all of Armageddon and then spread beyond it. But taking down a demon Primarch is an almost impossible task, even for an entire company of Grey Knights. To the point that even when they arrived to attack him directly, they were barely able to damage him, as he cut down entire squads with single swings of his black blade.
No Grey Knight displays the exact same gifts as his brothers. Try to conceive of the actual manifestation of a species' wrath and defiance. That's what we threw against the Blood God's chosen champion. Slices in reality cleaved open in the sky and across the ground, vortex strong, sucking in the nearest Neverborn and even pulling at the great beast itself. Smoke and blood from its wings and armor were drawn away in a sucking rush, pulled back behind the veil where all of the creature's foulness belonged. Other knights, lacking the gifts of such mastery, attacked with gleaming blades, their psychic strength fed into the sacred steel to burn with the divine light of banishment. Nemesis Creed weaponry was anathema to demonkind, as surely as our own souls were, and every sword and hammer meeting Angron's flesh elicited fresh agony in the enraged godling. They scarred it, bruised it, shredded flesh from broken bones, yet seemed to have no effect at all. Telekinesis in our ranks, of which Malcadiel was merely one, protected the rest of us with shimmering domes of repellent force, resisting the Beast Lord's great blade. Such manifestations of holy protection still burst like bubbles after the second or third strike. Angron's screams shook the entire sky, redoubling the blood rain in a scything downpour, burning the kidney shields our brothers held above us. The beast itself was a savage, hideous blur. Its blade moved faster than the eye could follow, cracking down to blast light flares across forced domes or carve without pause through entire squads. Nothing pure remained in our communion now. Too few voices rose in defiance, and each of them was colored only by concentrated rage. My own gift manifested in the way that had always been easiest for me to express. Fire. It steamed from my fist, blanketing the Primarch's wings with the clinging tenacity of naphtha, sticking and dissolving all it touched like an acidic second skin. Other pyrokinees unleashed the same corrosive spillage. We were melting the thing alive. More than that, we were carving it to pieces, breaking it apart, incinerating it and dissolving it all at once. It laughed. It laughed and kept killing us.
The battle lasted for hours, but in the end, the Grey Knights emerged victorious. The beast was brought down in combat by Captain Taremar, but the cost in lives was staggering, both for the Space Wolves, but also for the Grey Knights. Of the 109 Grey Knights that had deployed against Angron, only 13 came back alive. Some mained beyond even being able to fight, but still, against all odds, some survived the onslaught, and managed to banish Angron back to the warp.
I turned to look at him. What of Captain Taremar? Rothroot shook his head.
A hero's death, that one. I'll never forget the sight.
Taremar was dead. I wasn't sure how to feel about it. I scarcely knew him. It seemed a cold and unwelcoming soul to call a brother, but his list of heroic deeds rivaled the Grand Masters of the 8 Brotherhoods. This would surely be the capstone to a knight considered a legend by future generations of our order. I made my limping way over the blasted earth, seeking the others. Tell me what happened.
With your golden captain, he stood before the beast after you broke the blade. He fought it. He killed it. That's what happened.
How descriptive. I looked back over my shoulder for a moment. The sagas on Fenris must be singularly dull, Rothroot snorted. His scratchy deep voice turned even that into a bass rumble.
You asked? I told you.
He was flexing and tensing his arm, clearly sore from his own shadow wounds. Bodies carpeted the ground. I'd paid such little heed in the battle, focusing only on slaughtering the Neverborn. But red-clad legionnaires Astartes warriors and corrupted human bodies lay in profusion among the bloody puddles. How many had we killed? Did such a number even matter in the shadow of the great beast's banishment? I found Enceladus a short distance away. He was slumped in a graceless, lifeless crouch, his head lowered to his chest. A host of enemy dead kept company with his corpse, each one bearing the marks of death by sacred shells and infused blade. His sword, recovered somehow from the Primarch's forearm, stood tall as a banner pole, impaling the breastplate of a fallen warrior from the desecrated World Eater's Legion.
The death toll of the first war for Armageddon was well in the billions. Entire cities slaughtered to the last man, not counting the forces of the Armageddon Steel Legion, the losses of the Space Walls, of the Grey Knights, and the fallen of the Inquisition forces. This war would lead to the events of the Months of Shame, that we already covered in our video The Space Marines vs the Inquisition that you can find on the channel. So, if you want to learn about the war between the Space Walls and the Grey Knights and the General Inquisition, you can just watch that video, as that war was the result of the first war for Armageddon. In the end, the planet will completely be purged of all of its inhabitants, purified by flame and ideal for recolonization. In just a few months, the war was expunged from Imperial records, and the planet was once again at an optimal state of production of soldiers and war machines like it was in Origin. Okay, how did this one die, Pio?
He thought it would have been a good idea to speak in the language of the Space Wolves.
Normally that would mean Ferrisian, but knowing that it was a Pio, did he just try to bark at them or something?
Yeah, kinda.
These Pios have the sense of self-preservation of a Krieg trooper, another one for the Pio Starch refinery. And now, the moment many people have waited for. The conflicts where the main sworn enemy of all the people on the planet of Armageddon will finally make itself known for the first time. We move to the second war for Armageddon. But before speaking of the war itself, we need to do some introductions for the main players that will take part in it, as their stories are more important even of the wars they fought. Let's start from the main villain of these two wars for a change. His legend, believe it or not, started in M32, at the end of the War of the Beast. Farseer Eldrad Ultran will look into the future, and confirm that for how much the Imperium had killed the Beast of Ullanor, and then once again killed another beast always at Ullanor, another will rise, as beasts are banished, never truly killed. To be specific, he will say that the cry of Mag Uruk Thraka echoes still in the other sea. The orc that would actually become the terror of Armageddon was actually born as a nobody. An orc born in a snow blizzard on the planet of Uruk, in blood, bile and fungus. This orc joined the mob of a small orc fort known as Golgotha, and there he started learning of Gork, of Mork, of the galaxy. He started learning how to be a true orc. He will learn of how the orcs acted and moved war, learning that the planet had been invaded by various enemies, and that time after time the orcs had driven them back. None of them ever dared to try again. None but the humans, that had left an entire fort to watch over the planet of Uruk. This unexceptional orc will give the chief of the fortress of Golgotha an idea, after observing the light of the fort.
The newcomer thought about their options. They were keen to insult the chief as it'd mean a good fight, but they looked at those lights and realized they might mean the best fight of all. It was a weird idea, but something about it made their head tingle. So they went with Mork, and all insulted the chief a little bit.
Nah,
They said,
not soft. Old though, and a lot of good fights. Taking a lot of knocks to the head. You forget things. It's alright though. Why don't we smash it up when the sun rises?
the chief's face folded up in confusion as they tried to work out how angry they were. But then the idea hit them, probably, and their frown fell off into roaring, spit-spraying laughter.
Listen up!
They bellowed to the crowded hut, lurching up so fast they nearly banged their skull on the hut's rafters.
The gods have given me a big idea.
They half-lied, tapping their scar-riven skull with one talon before stabbing it out towards the night.
See the beaky folk top on Rock Block Peak? I've had enough of it. Soon as the sun's up, we're gonna do it in. Full assault, heavies at the front end.
They thought for a second.
Everyone else at the front and all. But first,
They finished as a crooked grin spread behind the rusted iron teeth of their fight jaw.
we're gonna drink this out dry. Bruce free until it's run out. So get stuck in. If anyone's not got a headache by tomorrow, I'll be giving them one.
As it often happens with the orcs, this fight for the newcomer would also be the last. As the full strength of Golgotha charged the gates of the human fortress, they found it empty of defenders. But while nobody was there to fight them, the fortress itself wasn't defenseless. As the orcs reached the gates, a row of turrets rose out of the wall with a quiet whirl, and indiscriminately opened fire. The orcs of Golgotha won the fight against the turrets, but many of them were slaughtered in the process. The newcomer was between the wounded. He was not yet dead, but he wasn't between the orcs walking home. He was left behind as dead, as Goths don't carry the wounded with them. A bolter shell had hit the nameless orc in the head, splattering a good chunk of his cranium, brain, and even one of his eyes on the wall away from his head. The nameless orc got up, half of his brain missing, and decided that if Gork and Mork wouldn't help him, he will find somebody that will. This orc traversed 200 miles of Badlands, reaching Raspike, another civilization of orcs, keeping his head together for the entire way, and fighting away wild beasts as he did so. He ended up finding an orc doc called Doc Groznyk. Miraculously, the nameless orc didn't die, and he should have numerous times, as the lore points out. Groznyk took apart the head of the orc like a faulty shooter, keeping the orc alive by any means necessary as it seemed to almost experiment. He stapled the brain of the orc together using scraps he had taken from former patients. Some of the pieces he used are already starting to rot. Groznyk started putting the skull of the orc back together. He used a scrap of metal that was brought to him by another orc. That said, it was backplating of a human Terminator, a piece of armor coming directly from a tactical dreadnought armor. This metal plate will prove to be the perfect shape to hold together the skull of the orc. Groznyk installed it together with a bionic eye, to give full sight back to the orc. He then started working on the body of the orc, that while not wounded, he wanted to use to experiment with bionics. At that point, the blood loss was too heavy, and the orc died on the operating table. Not that Groznyk cared too much about it. The patient was rolled off the table and dragged to the back of the tent by a goon Groznyk had hired to shift corpses that week. When the Grot started to work on the body to remove everything of value before it would be cut into pieces to be eaten, something extremely weird that would sign the death warrant of billions would happen.
The body started twitching. Then it started shaking, and then it was properly thrashing around, clawing blindly at its new skull bits like it was trying to find something. It went completely rigid for a second. Every muscle tensed so hard I thought something was going to snap, and then sat bolt upright, mouth wide open in what was either complete confusion or some kind of awe, like it had seen something mega. But before I could work out what was happening, the body grabbed me by the shoulder, and I had the same shock I'd gotten from the getter, only longer and burnier and worse, 'cause the body wouldn't let go. It held on till steam started coming off me. But I didn't have long to worry about that, 'cause that was when the body looked right at me, and in its one proper eye was a grin so green that it became the universe.
The nameless orc was not yet dead, and he came back after having a great vision of war, of slaughter, of the orcs dominating the galaxy, and all of it will be caused by him. At that point, he went out of the tent and approached the returning war boss Dragmek to make himself known, and to start uniting the orcs for their great destiny.
What's it you're after then, runt?
Bellowed Dragmek cordially.
I told you.
Said Ghazghkull like there wasn't some massive git wearing half a tank pointing an artillery piece at him.
You're an offense to the gods. You fight other orcs, squabbling over human scrap like a snotling. You are no sort of orc, and Ghazghkull know it.
When he'd finished, Dragmek laughed again, but not as many of his cronies laughed with him this time. It wasn't the fact that Ghazghkull wasn't afraid that unnerved them. Orcs can't be afraid, the lucky gits. It was the fact that he was talking like he'd already won the fight, and Dragmek didn't know it yet. It was weird.
I'll wait for Ghazghkull to tell me that themselves. Thanks,
said the warlord, less cheerful now, and leveled the sight of his weapon at Ghazghkull.
For now, you give him my regards. After I pull this trigger and you're waiting in the great greens to get belched into a new body. Now do us a favor and tell us your name first, so I can have it painted on this gun. I am the War of the Warlords, and the prophets of Ghazghkull. They speak through my tusks, and my fists, and my head. I am Ghazghkull, and I will bring great slaughter.
Ghazghkull will fight and kill Dragmek, and then go on a campaign to conquer all 6 clans of the orcs on the planet of Uruk, to bring them under his control and then start a war that the orc gods will be proud of. The orcs also needed to hurry, as the planet of Uruk was slowly dying. And after some convincing and work, Ghazghkull convinced the orc tribes he had conquered to build transports to take them into space, claiming that the gods would provide something to take them to their destiny. And Gork and Mork did indeed provide. A giant space hulk emerged in the system where the planet of Uruk was situated. So the orcs had to work fast to get on their transports and get pretty much launched against the space hulk before it was out of reach. The orcs would end up boarding the space hulk en masse. As the space hulk had come from a warp rift, it was obviously filled with demons, and a fight broke out between the orcs and the creatures of the warp for the control of the space hulk. Ghazghkull himself would end up facing a bloodthirster that emerged from a portal to the warp that the orcs needed to shut down before they could go on their wag. Ghazghkull fought him personally, and ended up defeating it in melee combat.
Ghazghkull kept hammering down long after the demon stopped fighting back. I don't think those things can die, so I couldn't say I killed it, but it was busted up so bad it couldn't move, and when he got bored of battering it, Ghazghkull picked up the body and chucked it back through the hole in the world. And then, with nothing else to fight, the boss squared up to the guttering portal itself with a grimace of pure hate.
Is that it?
He bellowed into the warp, voice soaring with the contempt of the gods themselves.
That was pathetic!
He roared, and I swear, if it was possible for an unknowable rent in the fabric of space to cower, that's what I saw happen then,
Send something bigger!
demanded the prophet.
The Space Hulk would be renamed World Killer, and Ghazghkull and his orcs ended up re-entering the warp with it, disappearing from the system and from the isolation on Uruk, and moving towards slaughter as the war boss had promised. And before moving on, there is a little myth to this band about Ghazghkull Mak Uruk Thraka, that obviously some of the other lore YouTubers have contributed in spreading.
There's an orc war boss, the most popular orc. His name is Ghazghkull Mak Uruk Thraka. Does that sound like anyone to you at all?
Ghazghkull Mak Uruk
Mak
Thraka?
Uruk Thraka.
No.
Margaret Thatcher.
That's Margaret Thatcher! But in orc
Margaret
speak, that's hilarious. Are you kidding me? That's so...
When there is confirmation that this myth is not true at all. The myth in question is that Ghazghkull, that is a very old character in Warhammer 40k. In fact, being a character coming directly from the 90s, is a spoof or a parody, or even a direct insult to the former UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. This myth is around because of their similar sounding names and the fact that the similar sounding name was given to an orc war boss. But this is a myth spread around by a community that doesn't bother with fact-checking most of the time. In fact, Andy Chambers, the original creator of Ghazghkull, has confirmed that the character has exactly zero to do with Margaret Thatcher to begin with. I share my response here for general amusement and edification. The real answer is far more arcane than that. In the early 80s, my friends and I used to do live role-playing. It wasn't called that then, but that's what it became in later years. We played monsters a lot, particularly orcs. So we worked out basic orcish based on the bits of black speech in Lord of the Rings, so we could communicate without the adventurers understanding what we said. In that framework, Mak Uruk Thraka, Big Orc Leader, Ghazghkull, Metal Skull. Coincidentally, the son we called Ghazghkull, Fire Skull. No Meg involved. We were doing our best to forget about the Wicked Witch. And because many people will claim that this comment might have been altered or made up completely, we ended up finding proof of somebody asking him directly about it. Just to avoid another Lamenter's motto mistake by not double-checking sources.
Good, let the witch rot. I'm sure Ghazghkull would actually be a more effective and competent Prime Minister than Marge ever was.
And now, let's move to his counterpart. A legendary character of the Imperium of Men that will become one of the greatest heroes of Armageddon. Our story starts on Taos 3. A boy, just 7 years old, gets torn away from a life of peace and luxury by officers of the Imperial Guard. The entire system was at war with the Orcs, and the luxuries of his now dead parents were being repossessed by the governments of the planet of Taos 3. Ceased to be spent to raise more Imperial Guard regiments to fight the Orcs. The boy, that we can call just Bass, was a weak and fat product of Taos 3 aristocracy, and he was ripped from his high-standing position and sent to live with his last living relative, his maternal grandfather, a former sergeant of the Imperial Guard, that bore all the scars and signs of a life spent in combat, now in his 70s, and a retired veteran. The boy will live hell now as a simple citizen of a far-failing village inside a knife city. He will be brutally beaten in school, even stabbed at one point, while living like all other low-born around him, his grandfather scorning him and visibly despising his weakness. This will go on for a few months. The beatings, the crying. The boy will live through an hell he didn't even know existed. Until finally, he asked to his grandfather to teach him how to defend himself, how to survive in the new world he was thrust in. His grandfather, that he would only address as Sarge, would accept. He spent months training the boy brutally, so brutal in fact that the weakness of his rich upbringing would be completely deleted. In the end, he managed to fight back against the bullies that were tormenting him, wounding various of them brutally, and even managing to scare into submission their chief. But the boy that had tormented him would reveal something shocking to Bass. His grandfather was the one paying him and the others to torment him. Bass will confront his grandfather, and he didn't deny it. He despised the man by this point, to a level of hatred that he didn't know was possible to have for another living being. But he wanted to know more, to be trained more, to be turned into something to fear, and not a weak boy like when he arrived. The training will go on for 2.5 years. The boy, now 10, was pretty much being trained to be an Imperial Guardsman by his own grandfather. It is then that the war against the Orcs reached them. His grandfather will be recruited back into the Guard to fight against the incoming Orc force that was going to assault the city. He will give Bas one last gift before leaving though, his personal knife, etched with his surname. The Orcs would overwhelm the defenders and conquer both the village and the Hive City, to the point that Bas will survive for months alone in a village invaded by Orcs, risking death numerous times, spending his time scavenging for food, hiding, resting, exploring. He would even kill some Gretchins too when forced to. He will learn how the Orcs live, fight, hunt, and will counter them at every turn. At one point, he would even manage to free a group of slaves that had been brought to the village by the Orcs. He believed all that time that he was the last human surviving on Taos 3, but some others remained. At that point, an attack would arrive at the village. Imperial forces were here, and had come to slaughter the Orcs once and for all. It is here that Bas will be saved by a platoon of stormtroopers led by a commissar, and following the man to safety, he will take his first steps into legend.
Okay, I don't know this lore. What are you talking about?
If you were a lore master, you will be the one heading the show, Pio, so it is normal you don't know it. The story I am describing is explained in the short story, which short my ass, it is 64 pages long, called Survivor, containing the collection of stories known as There Is Only War.
Okay, but who is Bas?
Bas is short for Sebastian, Pio. In this case, the full name would be Sebastian Vardin.
Vardin?
Yes, but when he was rescued in that isolated city on Taos 3, he decided that the surname of his own grandfather, the same surname etched on the knife that he was given from the man that he so hated, but that at the same time was the man responsible for teaching him how to stay alive, was a better fit for who he was now.
Wait, I think I get it now.
Yes, this is the backstory of Sebastian Yarrick. Yarrick will be inducted into the Schola Progenium, and will be trained to become a stormtrooper, the elite special forces of the Imperial Guard. But in the end, Yarrick decided to don the black, and became a commissar of the Imperial Guard. Yarrick will get experience in combat long before the events of Armageddon. In fact, he was leading the 252nd Steel Legion Regiment on the moon of Ionos against heretic forces around 100 years before the Second War for Armageddon. Even if, having checked the sources, the original short story mentions that this engagement was centuries, plural, before the Second War for Armageddon. And that just adds to the confusion. And now that all introductions are made, we can move to the Second War for Armageddon, and the two main protagonists of it. An orc following the will of his gods, and a human with a burning innate hatred for the Greenskins, and that had fought them from when he was a mere child. This is the Second War for Armageddon. It is the year 941 and 41. The Space Hulk world killer that the Orcs of Ghazghkull had taken control of would emerge from the warp in the Armageddon system. The High World of Armageddon is the capital world of the Armageddon sector, and lies roughly 10,000 light years to the galactic northeast of Terra. The planet is the vital hub of communications of the Armageddon sector, and at this point is also the main supplier of weapons for numerous Imperial Guard regiments, even far from its own territory. The loss of Armageddon will pose a serious threat to the Imperium's power in this area of the galaxy. At the time of the invasion, the planet was under the control of Overlord Hermann von Straub, who was once described by Princeps Prime Curtis Mannheim of Legio Metallica as the greatest waste of flesh and bone born in the last 500 years.
For who doesn't know it, Princeps are the pilots of the legendary Titans forming the Titan Legions of the Mechanicas.
It was von Straub's complete lack of preparation that cost the Imperium dearly. When the massive Space Hulk was sighted in the Armageddon system, von Straub did nothing to investigate or report its appearance to other Imperial authorities. Ghazghkull decided to follow his visions, and set the Space Hulk on a collision course with the planet of Armageddon, ordering the thrusters to the maximum of their capacity, and the massive bulk of World Killer started moving towards the continent of Armageddon Prime. Various ships and orbital defenses tried to stop it, but they were all blown apart or completely useless against the giant Space Hulk that had just emerged from the warp inside the system. In the end, the Space Hulk reached Armageddon, and didn't even try to slow down when it entered the atmosphere.
World-shaking arrival. Surrounding Imperial fleets, long-ranged missiles, and the planet's orbital defense lasers did their best to stave off the inevitable. Their firepower managed to shear away a few chunks of the oncoming Space Hulk, but they could not stop the terminal dive of World Killer. nor could they alter its course. Although shorn of a good deal of its mass by the desperate salvos, the enormous space hulk plunged through Armageddon's polluted atmosphere to crash land upon its largest continent, Armageddon Prime. The deep impact of the landing shook the entire world, and its blast wave caused untold devastation. A cloud of debris shrouded the sun. Hundreds of thousands of orcs were instantly immolated by the cataclysmic contact of the landing. Their losses, however, were but a tiny fraction of their number. As the shock faded, a few of the orcs realized that they should all have died in that epic crash. Although the force field projector absorbing the brunt of their impact doubtlessly helped. Regardless, the orcs roared their approval at being alive after the exhilarating ride. Eager to release their pent-up aggression, they poured out of drop ramps or simply blasted new exit holes through the already torn and rent ruins of the remaining hulls.
The landing, as we will learn later, completely obliterated a smaller satellite city in the Wastes, with around 10 million souls inside it.
Ufern was gone. The Space Hulk had come down only a few hundred meters from its eastern edge. Entire neighborhoods had vaporized, and in their place were the sloping walls of the huge crater. The blast had flattened the rest of the city. Where spies had stood, there was only rubble. A few shapes reached upwards like broken fingers. There were fragments of towers, hollowed-out shells, a brittle trace of the city that had been. The Tempestora Hive militia skirted the southern edge of Ufern's grave. The land over which the columns marched had been scraped bare to the bedrock, and the new surface was rippled and cracked. Kona had to watch his footing. It would be easy to break a leg in one of the jagged crevasses.
After the violent landing of the orcs, von Straub sent out his planetary defense regiments piecemeal, and they were smashed to pieces by the vastly superior orc armies. The defenders of Armageddon were not ready for what hit them. The Astra Militarum and the planetary defense forces may have been well equipped, but they were wholly unprepared for the waves of violence that swept over their armies. Von Straub was visibly underestimating the strategic abilities of their foes. At that point, Ghazghkull ordered the other overlords he had defeated on the planet of Uruk and annexed in his own WAG to divide. And he formed 5 massive hordes of orcs, and sent them out into the wastes of Armageddon to reach the Hive cities, their new objective for a proper fight. Only one person was capable of seeing the bigger picture. That person was an old man, a commissar that at the time was working under von Straub, and was on his good way to retirement. Commissar Sebastian Yarrick would recognize the danger of the enemies they were facing, and going behind the back of von Straub, he ordered the astropaths to send out a distress signal for aid to the wider Imperium of Men. This would earn him von Straub's displeasure, and Commissar Sebastian Yarrick was banished to aid his hive for his misdeeds against the governor. Unknowingly, this would be a blessing in disguise. The first hive to fall was Hive Volcanoes. The Armageddon Steel Legion numbers were augmented by every regiment available, along with hastily armed citizens. Ghazghkull boldly declared that the hive would fall in 2 days' time, and enacted a plan to see his words become truth. The outer walls of the hive were targeted by blitz brigades, armored wedges of battle wagons. The first waves bore rams, and it would be their duty to break open the outer walls, using their trucks to carry them over the rubble. The second group of attackers followed in the wake of the smoke-churning orc battle wagons. These were the mobile infantry, mostly god boys with mobs of Burna boys amongst them. The third wave was composed of Scorchas. Their orders were to drive through the breaches and to clear any defenses with sweeping flames. Tractor beams will target the gates as the battle wagons clear the last trench. Timed correctly, the loaded wagons will be at top speed just as the doors were ripped off their hinges. Secondary plans included a Storm Boys airdrop and Stompas with wrecking balls opening up holes at strategic points. When the waves of infantry were finally released, they could enter Hive Volcanoes at will.
And people in the hobby still think that the orcs are this funny meme army and make jokes about them, when as you can see the orcs are a real menace.
The plan worked almost too well. The hive would have fallen in a single day were it not for its fierce resistance. Within the narrow confines of the hive's underways, desperate humans resorted to all manners of traps and ambushes. Despite their heroics, hundreds of thousands of orcs swept into Hive Volcanoes, and its population was massacred or enslaved. After Hive Volcanoes was captured, the remaining hives of Armageddon Prime soon followed. The orcs had taken control of one of the 2 continents of Armageddon in mere days, and now they were aiming at Armageddon Secundus.
Seeing how they talk and that people believe they are English hooligans, I have to ask, do you have a license for that Shura?
Keep going like this and we'll make an orc PO next video.
I wonder how he will fare against Servo Pio. That's a good idea actually.
I don't think it changes much. POs are not renowned for their brilliant intelligence.
What do you mean? I'm incredibly bright. Look.
Yeah, I can see why Servitor Pio defeated you. Von Straub was not concerned with the loss of Armageddon Prime, declaring that the orcs will never be able to cross the thick jungles that separated them from Armageddon Secundus.
You will notice that this man has an extremely shitty superpower. He manages to be wrong in everything he says.
Indeed, Von Straub was wrong. The forces of Ghazghkull swept the jungles and embarked on a massive conquest, crossing the Stygius and Diabolus rivers and marching on the hives of Armageddon Secundus. When Armageddon's season of shadows set in, the cyclical time when the planet's volcanic mountains erupted, the turbulent skies were permanently crimson-hued. To the orcs, this was another sign of their impending victory. To get to Armageddon Secundus, the orcs had to cross a swathe of equatorial jungle considered impenetrable by the humans. The jungle was a dangerous territory, giant mud pits and swamps, filled with ferocious wild beasts. The Greenskins reveled in it, attacking the flora and fauna while the mechs erected pontoon bridges or projected force fields across the sinking bogs. By their drive and cobbled ingenuity, the orc hordes pressed through faster than Imperial armies could march. Infantry, armored columns, stompa mobs, and towering gargants crossed the crude bridges and emerged on the far side of the jungles. Once again, the orcs caught the humans unprepared and smashed through their defensive positions. As the orcs raced across the ash deserts towards the hive cities, the towering god engines and 10 companies of mankind advanced out into the barrens to meet them. From that point on, the battles were more fiercely fought, and orc casualties began to mount. First was the clash on the parched desert known as the Death Barrens. While the colossal war engines of the Iron Skull's Titan Legion dueled with the Gargants, the massed enemy tanks began to blow great holes in the orc hordes. The Greenskins did not waver, but continued to advance, albeit more slowly, into the thunderous barrage. The energies of the Wa might have been drained then and there, were it not for the dread mobs. Clanking forward, these iron-plated tank killers strode through the shellstorm. A land armada of Death Dread, Killacans and Alkin Morkanauts lurched into the Imperial armor formations. Explosions lit up the plains as power claws wrenched off turrets. Basso arms reached in to savage the exposed crew, and the screams of the eviscerated victims were music to the orcs' ears. With the foe's war machines reduced to smoking wreckage, the Stompas and Death Dread used their firepower to tip the scales on the evenly matched duel between the Gargants and the Titans. Towering mushroom clouds rose from the destroyed Imperial Titans, and the concussive blast of their detonations slew many orcs. But when the shockwaves ceased, the green tide flowed over the enormous craters. At that point, Von Straub ordered Princeps Mannheim to lead his titans into battle against the orc armies, unsupported by other forces. Mannheim had little choice but to obey, though he knew that it would lead to the destruction of his forces. Although the titans of Legion Metallica inflicted heavy casualties on the orcs, they were all but annihilated by the numerous orc gargants that opposed them. Everywhere, the Imperial forces were being driven back in disarray. The orcs swept onward, storming Hive Infernos as the season of storms broke in full fury. Refugees numbering in the tens of thousands marched across the inhospitable ash dunes, dying from exposure to the harsh environment or falling prey to the rampaging mobs of orc speed freaks, which constantly harried them in their flight. By now, the humans knew what lay in store for them, and their resistance stiffened. The orcs sacked Hive Infernos after the Blood Axes struck a deal with its corrupt governor. At that point, the orcs moved southward and they split, descending on Hive Elsrich and Hive Hades. When the orcs besieged the massive cities, Von Straub unleashed a secret weapon, a massive stock of virus bombs from his personal arsenal. This was pure madness, as these weapons were capable of wiping out all life on Armageddon if misused. Gladly, the ancient devices frequently malfunctioned, and although they ended up killing a giant amount of orcs, many humans were lost too as the missiles flew out of control and plunged into Imperium lines or exploded in refugee camps. But once again, luckily not all of them worked, or all life would have been annihilated on the surface of Armageddon. But even with all of these losses, the Wa of Ghazghkull seemed unstoppable. The orcs battered themselves against the Hive cities for little gain. At Elsrich, converted supertankers took those unable to fight across the Tempest Ocean. And once the last ship had left, those who remained grimly swore to defend the city to the last man. Entire teams equipped with explosive vests charged into orc encampments and detonated themselves to do as much damage as possible, while the dockside loaders welded themselves into the armored cape of their cranes and fought with the gigantic gargants rampaging across the city. The fighting was bitter and violent, but in the end, Elsrich fell to the orcs. Although the battle for Armageddon had been ferocious, it was at Hades Hive that the conflict entered a new level of savagery and fierceness. Led by Commissar Sebastian Yarrick, the defenders of Hades Hive fought as though they were possessed. The orcs made so little headway against such stiff resistance that Ghazghkull himself joined the attack, leading his forces from the front. Thus, the stage was set for the greatest contest of wills in the entire war.
It was Yarrick who kept the battered defenders of Hades Hive together throughout Ghazghkull's repeated assaults.
The Commissar's dark belief in victory inspired the Imperial Guardsmen to prodigious acts of sacrifice and courage. Indeed, so motivated were the soldiers in Yarrick's presence that not a single soldier was executed for cowardice, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Yarrick's masterful leadership thwarted the Orcs' attempts to storm Hades' Hive time and time again, and his efforts in delaying Ghazghkull proved to be the turning point in the war.
Ghazghkull becomes so angered at the failed attempts to conquer Hive Hades that he even sent one of his own war bosses, Ullanor, to break into Hive Hades and kill Commissar Yarrick. But even that attempt to break in the city and Sebastian Yarrick miserably failed.
Commissar Yarrick was always fond on the front lines and suffered many wounds during the defense of Hades' Hive, most notably when he fought war boss Ullanor single-handed. The massive greenskin severed the Commissar's arm at the elbow with a snapping battle claw. Fighting through the pain and shock, Yarrick beheaded the war boss with a single sweep of his chainsword before calmly reaching down and plucking the battle claw from the Orc's twitching body. And holding it aloft for all to see, the Orcs retreated in horror as the defenders of Hades' Hive leapt upon the aliens with indomitable vigor. Only when the Orcs were repulsed did Yarrick allow himself the luxury of passing out.
At that point, Ghazghkull was enraged, and he started trying anything he could think of. Lightning assaults, feints, overwhelming wave attacks, and mass bombardments. Airdropped storm boys attacked from the skies while the sewer tunnels were infiltrated by the craftiest commandos. These tactics had already broken Hive Elsrich, each offensive advancing more deeply into the seaport Hive. With the streets red with both human and orc blood, Ghazghkull's final tactic was revealed: to gather weird boys together so their addled minds blasted forth a psychic storm.
Orc weird boys are pretty much orc psychers, just for clarification.
This tactic had worked wonders in Elsrich. The defenders, paralyzed by madness, were overrun very easily. But not in Hades. Each of Ghazghkull's moves was parried by the tactics of Commissar Yarrick. The storm boys were ripped from the skies by anti-aircraft fire. The commandos were met by tunnel fighters in a running battle that stymied the underground advance. Siege engines were sabotaged, and teams equipped with bomb vests took down Gargants. The defenses of Hades' Hive were masterminded by Yarrick itself, who was destined to become the most respected human that Ghazghkull ever met. As Ghazghkull fixated on tearing Hades' Hive apart, on his command another orc army was set to overwhelm the Hive city of Acheron. But that was before the sky exploded. Orbital bombardment blasted craters amongst the orc hordes. Even as they gaped skyward, they saw Thunderhawks peel out of the cloud cover, the roar of their engines audible over the concussive shockwave of their bombing runs. The Space Marine reinforcements had finally arrived. The Blood Angels, the Ultramarines, and the Salamanders attacked, and the Orcs tasted the bitterness of crushing defeat on Armageddon for the first time. The authority of Von Straub was ignored, as the chapter master of the Blood Angels, the legendary Dante, took command of the defensive efforts to repel the Orcs from Armageddon. Von Straub was arrested for his incompetence and crimes against the Imperium by order of Lord Dante himself, though he later escaped. You can even see some dialogue regarding this part in the game Warhammer 40k Armageddon, of all places.
I do not recognize your authority, Astartes. How dare you order my arrest? I am the legally appointed planetary governor as recognized by the Adeptus Terra. I will not submit to the judgment of inferiors. You and your lucky traitor of Acheron's impotent defense can collude to take this wealth for yourselves. But the people will know, yes, they will know who the true master of this world is. And that's not you, Lord Dante, or your pet human commander. It's the Xenos beast, Warlord Ghazghkull Thraka, who will win. I hope he obliterates every space marine and treacherous guardsman he comes across.
The efforts of the Space Marines and the renewed morale of the defenders managed to slowly turn the tide on Armageddon. Hive Acheron and Tartarus were churning out weapons and vehicles by the thousands, while the Space Marine forces began to force the Orcs to retreat from the south of Armageddon. But now, we need to stop for a moment. There is a story that I'm sure not many of you know. The story of one of my favorite characters ever in 40k. A story that starts in the Second War for Armageddon and tragically ends in the Third War for Armageddon. This story is one of the reasons I am so in love with the nature of the Blood Angels as both warriors and monsters. I am talking of none other than the tragic story of Captain Erasmus Tycho. Erasmus Tycho rose to the position of captain in the Blood Angels' Third Company when his predecessor was slain during the Second War for Armageddon. The former sergeant swiftly proved his abilities, orchestrating the rout of boss Gracchus speed freaks and recapturing key defensive positions along the river Chiron. The man was a master strategist, and because of his abilities and tactics, he was considered Dante's personal prodigy and chosen successor. Bolstered by their success against the Speed Freaks, the Third Company pushed on, striking at the Orc supply lines from Armageddon Prime. It was on such a mission that Tycho and his company were ambushed. Though the Blood Angels triumphed, Captain Tycho was hit directly by an Orc Weird psychic assault early in the battle, and was left for dead. Somehow, no one quite knows how, Tycho survived, but the after effects of the terrible psychic onslaught had paralyzed half of his face, frozen forever in a terrible grin of murderous rage. Tycho's obsession with fine aesthetic taste and beauty was as great as that of any other Blood Angel, and to him, such a fate was worse than death itself. So it was because of this unfortunate event that bitterness and rage began to creep into Tycho's once pure heart, opening the door to the pent-up anger that lay at the core of Tycho's very being. Unable to bear the pitiful looks of his battle brothers, Tycho ordered the chapter's most revered artificer to forge a mask to cover his disfigurement. This simple act seemed to grant Tycho a measure of peace, and for a time, he regained his old composure. For the remainder of the Armageddon campaign, the Blood Angels' Third Company stood in the thick of the fighting, Tycho directing their efforts as he had in the early stages, though none could deny that an increased fervor stole over the captain whenever he tasted the tang of Orc blood upon the air. For those that know the story of Captain Tycho, they already know where this is going. For those that know the lore of the Blood Angels, they will probably have a suspicion. But for the rest of you, wait until we reach the Third War for Armageddon. There you will learn of how an angel falls. For now, back to the Second War. At that moment, if Ghazghkull had turned his attention to the deteriorating situation, it is likely he could have rallied his armies and driven off the Space Marine counterattack. Had he done so, Armageddon would likely have fallen. However, he had become obsessed with completing the siege of Hades Hive. The defiant resistance of Yarrick challenged Ghazghkull's ability and reputation as a warlord, a challenge that he could not back down from. The Orc warlord gathered every available warband to his army, and with this mighty force, fell upon Hive Hades with the hatred an Orc only reserves for its greatest enemy. Despite desperate rationing, supplies in Hades had all but run out. And seeing the mass of orcs preparing to attack, Yarrick decided that the city could no longer stand. Those who could be were evacuated by daring shuttle runs, risking the orc anti-aircraft fire and interceptors to escape. The Space Marines arrived too late to save Hades, attacking the orcs even as they smashed their way inside. Yarrick was almost slain too, but his iron will stopped him from succumbing to the near-mortal wounds he had suffered.
This man has adamantium-level balls.
It is during this battle that Ghazghkull will show the extent of his cunning. Masses of orc reinforcements had stayed hidden to the west, intent upon assaulting Hive Tartarus in the south, while the Space Marines were busy at Hive Hades. If Tartarus was overrun, the industrial power in the south would be smashed, and the orcs could easily consolidate their position, while the Imperial armies were being moved down from the north. As the orcs assaulted Tartarus, their vanguard already pushing into the streets of the Hive City, Lord Dante ordered a fast redeployment of Space Marine forces. A giant drop pod assault descended into the heart of the orc forces, even as Stompa smashed down the Hive's gates. Blindsided again, the Greenskins were pushed back as the Blood Angels set to massacring any orc unlucky enough to be caught by them. The orcs were on the verge of breaking when Ghazghkull arrived. His counterattack was just beginning to wrest the initiative back when Ghazghkull and his bodyguard disappeared altogether. Rumors that their illustrious war boss had fallen spread like wildfire amongst the orcs, and they wavered and broke. With this, the Imperium thought they had driven the orcs from Armageddon. It was not so. Many fought their way into the ash wastes and escaped, eventually reaching the depths of the equatorial jungles. Moreover, Ghazghkull was not slain. Some say the end of Gork reached down to extricate his chosen one. Some of his detractors claim that he instead had fled, but however it happened, the war boss escaped Armageddon with his life. Now, here there is a bit of conflicting information, mainly coming from info on Lexicanum that the source they indicate doesn't have, as I have gone through all of them, and especially the fact that technically the novel of Ghazghkull Thraka, Prophet of the Wa, retcons the end of the war, with Ghazghkull leading a final-ditch attempt to repel the forces of the Imperium through the Skeletus River, but they were eventually defeated after a dozen years of fighting. But to be honest, this part pretty much breaks the entire canon timeline of events until the Third War for Armageddon, so I think we can consider it not the canon lore. And now, technically the events continue a bit more with the two battles for Golgotha, that I'm still uncertain if we should include into this video or not, as it is about Armageddon. Nah, we will not include them.
Boo!
Pio, the video is already long as it is, I don't think we can fit them.
Boo!
The video is called 4 Wars for Armageddon. I never said anything about Golgotha. You know what? Fine.
Ouch.
You want to learn about the fucking battles of Golgotha? You will learn about the battles of Golgotha.
Don't worry, my autistic lore friends, I got you.
You do realize that if I have to teach them about Golgotha, you will have to learn it too?
Fuck!
After his disappearance from Armageddon, Ghazghkull withdrew to his stronghold in the Golgotha sector. There he marshaled his strengths once more, and dwelt on what he had learned from his first invasion of Armageddon. The Orc gods had revealed to Ghazghkull that in order to destroy your foe, you must know it. For Ghazghkull, the war for Armageddon had been a way to learn how the Imperium would react and deal with a major invasion. Over the next few years, Ghazghkull allied with warlord Nazdreg Ulg... Sti cazzo di nomi degli orchi sono impronunciabili da qualcuno che parla la lingua latina. Over the next few years, Ghazghkull allied with warlord Nazdreg Urdgrub, combining forces to make a devastating assault on the imperial planet of Piscina IV.
Piscina is actually an Italian word. It stands for pool.
This was no normal invasion, however. Nazdreg, a Bad Moon war boss, possessed an incredible amount of wealth and cunning. So much that he had some of the finest mechs in the galaxy in his employ. The mechs had pioneered a type of teleportation device that enabled Nazdreg to maneuver his troops directly onto the planet from his Space Hulk, even when it was located a massive distance away from the planet. Ghazghkull saw the revolutionary potential of these teleporters, and joined forces with Nazdreg to test it on the unsuspected planet of Piscina IV. The Imperial forces there were taken completely by surprise, and the planet was brought to its knees. Only the mysterious presence of Space Marines from the Dark Angels chapter saved Piscina from being overrun completely by greenskin armies. The Dark Angels suffered defeat after defeat at the hands of Ghazghkull's forces, culminating in a breathtaking duel at Khalidus Harbor between the Orc Warlord and the Grandmaster of the Deathwing. Though Ghazghkull all but broke Grandmaster Belial in two, the Deathwing forces had bought time for the rest of the Dark Angels to arrive. Piscina IV was saved, but Ghazghkull already had his prize. Striking a deal with Nazdreg, Ghazghkull left the Bad Moon Warlord to continue the war for Piscina in return for his best mech and the secrets of his teleporters. The Prophet of the Wa had work to do. Ghazghkull left Piscina for the Golgotha system, unaware that Commissar Yarrick had located him and was hot on his heels. Golgotha was a mining planet, rich in material wealth. The Orc Warlord intended to seize the planet and convert it into a giant ammunition factory, fueling a second Wa into the Armageddon sector. Using his teleporters to make a series of lightning strikes, Ghazghkull quickly overcame the war engines and battle colossi of the planet's Abhuman defenders.
By Abhuman defenders, the lore means squads. Unfortunately, we don't know how canon they stay in these wars, but it is good to mention them.
Within weeks, the sheer might of the massed orcs and gargants of Ghazghkull armies had battered the planet's defenses into rubble. Arriving at the climax of the battle for Golgotha, Commissar Yarrick led a squadron of Baneblade super heavy tanks into the fray, intending to hunt down Ghazghkull and leave the orc armies leaderless. Even these metal behemoths were not enough to stop the beast of Armageddon. The tank squadron was overrun and surrounded by Ghazghkull Evil Son's allies. Yarrick was crushed under the tracks of the battle fortress Doomrolla, and his unconscious body was brought before Warlord Ghazghkull himself. After a few weeks of inflicting idle torture, Ghazghkull decided that Commissar Yarrick was too good an enemy to waste. He released him from the stinking dungeons of his Space Hulk, because he intended to invade Armageddon once more, and he wanted a good fight when he got there. War will soon invade Armageddon once again. Also, if the episode of Hammer and Bolter about it, specifically the episode titled Old Bay Lies to be believed, this happened 3 years after the first war for Armageddon, and Yarrick came formally out of retirement just to chase and kill Ghazghkull mag Uruk Thraka. The second battle of Golgotha instead is almost unknown. The story is featured still in the same episode of Hammer and Bolter, but the only other source for it instead is in White Dwarf number 191. After Yarrick was let go and escaped Golgotha, he came back with a punitive force of Titans and Tech Guard, also known as Skitarii forces. The early battles went badly for the Imperium, as the sheer size of the Orc horde overwhelmed them time and time again. In an attempt to smash the massive Orc mobs, Ordinatus Golgotha was constructed in the recaptured strongholds of the squats.
If you don't know what an Ordinatus is, we will explain it during the third war for Armageddon, together with the Order of the Centurio Ordinatus, so soon you will know.
Ordinatus Golgotha, to be specific, is an heavy carrier capable of carrying and deploying 80 huge Hellfire missiles to tear apart enemy infantry formations. Each missile is filled with a potent acidic virus that burns through armor and serves through flesh, leaving any that manage to survive hideously crippled. Golgotha's terrifying Hellfire missiles devastated the Orcs, slaying thousands over the course of a week. The Orcs were routed from the squat homeworld, and since the Ordinatus Golgotha has always been in the forefront of any battle against enemies who have a strong numerical advantage. Unfortunately for Yarrick, Ghazghkull had already departed the planet by the time he had returned to Golgotha. There, we are done. Can we move back to the main topic of the video now?
You have my permission to do so.
And now we move to the biggest war ever fought for the planet of Armageddon after the Great Crusade. The table is set, the great beast of Armageddon has set his plans in motion. The prophet of the Wa will finish what he started, in a conflict known as the Third War for Armageddon. So, to understand fully the Third War for Armageddon, we first need to... Wait, where is P81?
Oh, he won't be joining us, unfortunately.
Why?
He kind of died.
What the... How?
Oh, it was when we were traveling to Golgotha to retell the events that happened there. He was looking for a bathroom on the ship. He took a wrong turn and ended up in an airlock. So...
You Pios have the survival instincts of a dodo.
we make up for it with our innate malice.
As I was saying, to understand fully the Third War for Armageddon, we first need to look at the mindset that Ghazghkull was in before he invaded Armageddon again. And no better place to learn his way of thinking than from a message that was found on a fallen warlord titan on the planet of Piscina IV, found by the Dark Angels after the war.
I am the hand of Gork and Mork. They sent me to rouse up the boys, to crush and kill, cause the boys forgot what they're here for. I was one of the boys, till the gods smashed me in the head, and I remember that Orcs is meant to conquer and make slaves of everything they don't kill. I am the prophet of the war, and all worlds burn in my boot prints. On Armageddon, I led the boys through the fire deserts, and smashed the Yumi's metal cities to scrap. I for Yarrick, old one-eyed Tartarus, and he for good, but we smashed this city too. I am death to anything that walks or crawls. Where I go, nothing stands in my way. We crushed the stunties on Golgotha, and we caught on one eye when the speed freaks blew the Yumi's big tents to bits. I let him go, cause good enemies is hard to find, and orcs need good enemies to fight, like they need meat to eat and grog to drink. I is more cunning than a grot, and more killing than a dread. The boys that follow me can be beat. On Piscina, we jumped the Marine boys, and our bus bows was covered in the helmets we took from the dead here. We burned them ports and killed their bosses, and left nothing but ruins behind. I'm Warlord Ghazghkull, Mog, Uruk, Thraka, and I speak with the word of the gods. We's gonna stomp the universe flat and kill anything that fights back. We's gonna do this, cause we're orcs, and we was made to fight and win!
I want to point out though that this quote that comes directly from the 3rd edition Codex of the Orcs, and took all the might of like a couple of dozen people in my Discord to track down, because all the sources mention the 4th edition Codex where you can find this quote but shortened, is actually wrong. Sebastian Yarrick to the Orcs is not known as Old One Eye. Old One Eye is in fact an infamous tyrannid lifeform that was so dangerous it gained a nickname. The nickname given to Sebastian Yarrick is actually Old Bale Eye. So, Pio, do the honor.
Ding Dong Games Workshop is wrong.
Now Ghazghkull knew how the Imperium fought, and was better equipped to deal with his enemies than he was before. And he will show all that he had learned exactly 57 years later from the first day of invasion during the Second War of Armageddon. Ghazghkull fleet tore back into the Armageddon sector, and the Greenskin hordes descended on the industrial world at its heart once more. The forces Ghazghkull had brought this time were overwhelming. The Orc fleet outnumbered that of Armageddon 6-1. Orc kill cruisers made self-destructive rushes against Imperial blockades with unbounded ferocity, losing a dozen of their number for a single Imperial vessel. Despite their skill, the Imperial Navy could not hold back the tide of forces that was coming. Worse still, at the height of the engagement, the naval commander, Admiral Peril, received communication from the nearby Yarrick and Mannheim monitor stations, warning the defenders that 3 more Orc fleets were inbound from the edges of the Armageddon system. The combined fleets of Ghazghkull and his allies numbered over 2,000 ships and at least 12 Space Hulks, the largest number ever to assail a world of the Imperium of Men. The strength of the Orcs' armada was further augmented by the presence of dozens of asteroid fortresses, known as rocks for the Orcs, drifting in the normally vulnerable tail of the Orc fleets. These heavily armored weapons platforms were no real threat in a long-range engagement, engagements, but the presence of such unusual numbers of them seemed to indicate some more sinister design at work. Nobody had yet realized what the plan of Ghazghkull for Armageddon truly was. On the planet below, frenzied preparations were taking place to defend Armageddon. Titan legions readied their weapons and consecrated their ancient plasma reactors. Imperial Guard regiments were mustered and dug in, and Space Marines of over 20 chapters started making defense plans and taking defensive positions in the most advantageous soon-to-be battlefields of the planet. The last transport to make planetfall on the planet before the Orc forces made it impossible to travel in and out of the system carried the old man himself. Commissar Yarrick had returned post-haste to Armageddon to aid once more in his defense. This was the first time Yarrick had set foot on the planet in 2 decades. With him was the Fortress of Arrogance, the very Baneblade from which Yarrick had led the defense of Golgotha many years ago. The war will soon reach Armageddon, and if the second war was devastating, it was nothing compared to what was coming for the third. But it is here that the story fragments even more, with parts of it retold in codices and part of it retold in novels. So, from here on out, know that the info we are going to retell comes from a varied number of sources. We will try to maintain chronological order as we do usually, but I ask you to pay attention because the story is extremely interesting, but it might become a bit harder to follow from here on out. Also, before we start, I have to say, the sources are an extreme mess on Lexicanum about this war specifically, all put at random and with even wrong pages in some of them, but that is to be expected. But there is one that we can exclude outright as non-canon, and that is White Dwarf 271, specifically the section of Lurking Evil, as this White Dwarf implies that the planet of Armageddon is indeed a Necron tomb world. Thing never confirmed in any of the other sources I researched for this video, and I can see why. Things were getting ridiculous. This place was the capital of an Orc empire, then it got invaded by Chaos, then by Orcs twice, and now it is even a tomb world? Yeah, nah, that is even too much for 40k. I can see why it was discarded. The first event in the chronological order of the Third War for Armageddon happens in the same night of Yarrick's arrival to the world. The old commissar will call upon the commanders of the Imperial forces of Armageddon in a great council of war to discuss the new threat and the strategic situation of the planet itself, together with the disposition of forces to be used for the incoming invasion.
Hades' hive will not survive the first week. The man speaking is ancient, and he looks every hour of his age. Both piety and hate echo in his every word. His name is Sebastian Yarrick. Even we Astartes must respect that name. What is coming in system now far exceeds what has laid waste to the planet before. The other hives must be reinforced 1,000 times over. Hades will burn. At our best estimations, Battle Fleet Armageddon, the orbital defenses, and the Astartes fleets remaining in the void will be able to deny the enemy landing for 9 days. These are our best estimates. And the West? 4 days. Once the orbital war is lost, be it 4 days or 9, our fleets will break from the planet in a fighting withdrawal. From then on, Armageddon will be defenseless beyond what is already entrenched upon the surface. The Orcs will be free to land whatever and wherever they wish.
As usual, I suggest reading the Book of Hellstreach. We will use many clips from the animation, that while it has its merits, it cut out a great deal of details, subplots, characters, and even entire parts of the war from it. For example, there is some scenes taken here and there of the battle at the docks of High Hellstreach, but we never get to see the entire invasion of the Orcs from the sea after they have destroyed the ocean platforms with submersiles. I like the animation, don't get me wrong, but my biggest gripe with it is the portrayal given to Nerovar in it. In the book Nerovar, the apothecary of Squad Grimaldus is the wake-up call Grimaldus needed to steal his nerves towards the end of the war for Hellstreach, while in the animation he is more portrayed like an immature petulant child than he truly is in the book, because many of his good moments have been cut from it. Anyway, let's go back to the story. Newly promoted Reclusiarch Merek Grimaldus, successor to Reclusiarch Mordred of the Black Templars, will be nominated to defend High Hellstreach. He will be deployed there to defend the city in the incoming invasion together with 100 of his brothers and Emperor's champion Bayard, always of the Black Templars. 6 weeks after the attack on the Armageddon system, the forces of Ghazghkull finally reached the planet of Armageddon, and Battlefleet Armageddon and the Space Marine elements in orbit finally engaged the Orc fleet that was ravaging the system, together with the orbital defenses of Armageddon itself.
What is that? Throne of the God Emperor.
Preparations for the defenses on the planet kept whirring and moving. Every hive and army on the planet bunkering down and preparing. Once the orbital defenses were lost and the Imperial fleet forced to withdraw, it would become impossible to give support or land anything anywhere on the planet. It is here that Grimaldus, after declaring martial law on the entirety of Hive Elsreich, will move to reach in the Wastes the battle group of Legio Invigilata under the control of Princeps Zara Mansion, the woman in control of a third of the Titans of Legio Invigilata. By personal negotiation, he will convince the Princeps to move her Titans in the defense of Elsreich instead of joining the rest of her Legio on the banks of the Hemlock River. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, Zara Mansion is the pilot of an Imperator-class Titan.
Welcome to Elsreich.
Hail, Chaplain. I was born in a hive like this, you know.
It is fitting then that you'll be dying here, Zaha.
Do you say so, Sir Knight? Have you seen me today?
It is impossible not to see you, Princeps.
It's impossible to kill me as well. Remember that, Grimaldus.
The best estimate of 4 to 9 days, though, soon were abandoned. The number of vessels in orbit were simply too many to contrast or delay for a significant amount of time. The orbital battle raged for 3 days and 2 nights, but by dawn of the 3rd day, the Orcs started landing on the planet in significant forces. Ground-based defense lasers and missile silos took a terrible toll on the Orcs as they landed, but the survivors regrouped and assailed the defenses of the planet with such terrible ferocity that soon more and more of the Horde was reaching the surface unscathed. The first real battles against the Orcs by Imperial forces were fought in various territories of the planet at once. They were fought at Hive Volcanoes, Acheron, Deathmire, and Elsreich. The first assault, at least on Elsreich, was repelled, and it is at that point that Grimaldus will contact Forge Master Jurisian. He had noticed, as the forces deployed in the Wastes were recalled from the city in defense, that a bunker had not obeyed the order, the bunker of D16 West. Now, Grimaldus had heard rumors about the bunker, of a secret weapon hidden under it, used in the first war against Angron and his demonic forces.
Ah yeah, for some reason in the Book of Elsreich, everyone knows of the secret war for Armageddon against Demon Primarch Angron. Thank Heremdemski Boden for that.
The bunker, that took long hours to get through as every level needed to be hacked into by hand by Jurisian, in the end revealed what they had come for. A legendary weapon was in fact hidden in D16 West.
I don't believe it. It can't be here.
It is. This is where the Mechanicus hid the Ordinatus Armageddon after the First War. This is the tomb of Oberon.
Okay, what is the Ordinatus Armageddon?
The Ordinatus Armageddon, also known as Oberon, is an ancient weapon created by the Centurio Ordinatus for the first war for Armageddon against Angron. It is a starship Nova Cannon mounted on 3 armored train compartments, using gravitic technology to be able to move around. Nova Cannons are deadly weapons in void battle, mounted usually on the biggest and most powerful of starships. The Ordinatus is pretty much a ground version of that weapon. Even if, I will be real, there is no source on it being used against Angron. The only source saying that is Elsreich. So, once again, Heremdemski Boden should stick to his lane instead of making stuff up.
Okay, new question. What is the Centurio Ordinatus?
The Centurio Ordinatus is an organization inside the Mechanicus domain which oversees the construction, maintenance and deployment of the massive and extremely powerful Ordinatus engines. Instead of leaving control of these war machines in the hand of Titan or Skitari legions, they all fall under the control of the Centurio Ordinatus, which decides where and when these weapons can be deployed, and they provide the crew and personnel needed to awaken, bless and use these weapons in battle without angering their ancient and volatile machine spirit.
Alright, so, what day of the invasion did this happen on?
The second day. Now we move forward. Soon the events outside of Elsrich will start happening too. As Grimaldus was working to recover Oberon in the Wastes, the orcs outside of Elsrich and around the planet were still landing, together with thousands of tanks, hundreds of gargants, and pre-constructed vehicles and artillery of all kinds. As Grimaldus theorized, they were waiting to have overwhelming forces before taking on the Hive itself. Grimaldus will leave Jurisian in the bunker to try and open the sealed door that led to Oberon, and will go back to Elsrich to help in its defense when the time came. As Grimaldus was traveling back to Hive Elsrich, the orbital war, at this point completely over, left space for Ghazghkull to enact his first vengeance against Armageddon.
Grimaldus, speak. The old man's predictions were correct, as you suspected. The enemy is annihilating Hades' Hive from orbit. It is crudely done. Standard bombardment with mass drivers to hurl asteroids at a defenseless city. A dark day's work, brother.
Hive Hades, the Hive where Ghazghkull had lost the last war, was still in ruins even after 57 years. The Hive was evacuated of as much human life as possible and then abandoned by the Imperial defenses. And as Commissar Yarrick had predicted, that would be the first target of the war. Hive Hades will be completely destroyed by a mixture of orbital bombardment and a meteor being thrown on top of it. Grimaldus will be summoned probably not more than a day after by Zaha in Air Imperator Titan. The Princeps, having learned of what Grimaldus was doing in D16 West, was ordered by Air superiors in the Mechanicus to either stop him with diplomacy or kill him if no solution could be reached.
You requested my presence?
No. I summoned you. You should be staying where you stand.
That would be an unwise solution. No one in this room is capable of wounding me.
I see you do not show your face this time, Knight. You see me revealed, yet you hide behind the death mask of your Emperor.
Our Emperor. Let us tread carefully, you and I will answer the questions you have regarding D16 West.
Tell me why you have done this.
It is the Ordinatus Armageddon. It is one of the greatest weapons ever wielded by man. This is a war, Zaha. I need weapons to win it.
Necessity is not enough. You may not harness Oberon on a whim, Grimaldus.
The Master of the Forge will determine that for himself.
You do not understand. The sacred war platforms must be blessed by the Lord of the Centurial Ordinatus. Their machine spirits would be enraged without this appeasement. Oberon will never function. Do you not see?
The only reason the Mechanicus is not committing one of its greatest weapons to the war to save this world is because it remains unblessed.
Yes. The soul of the machine will rebel. If it even awakens, it will be wrathful.
It grieves me to ignore your wishes, Princeps, but I will not have Jurisian cease his ministrations.
Grimaldus, I am ordered by my superiors to see you dead before you continue this course of action. This can only end one way.
Grimaldus, in the end, would end up agreeing to wait for the Lord of the Centuri Ordinatus to arrive to Armageddon from Terra to bless Oberon for use in battle. But while he agreed to waiting, he will not recall Jurisian from his duties to acquire the weapon, in case the Lord of the Centuri Ordinatus never made it through the blockade to reach Armageddon. At this point of the invasion, feral orcs started sweeping down from the Palidus Mountains and out of the equatorial jungles to join the growing horde of the orcs.
Feral orcs are the ones born directly on Armageddon from what was left of the orcs that arrived during the first invasion of Ghazghkull. In case you were wondering, they were feral because they were born in the wilderness of the planet.
Where the defenses proved too strong to be taken by direct assault, huge mobs of orcs and their war machines were teleported directly into battle from the orc space hulks above the planet, using the technology Ghazghkull had acquired during the battles of Golgotha and Piscina. The ground defenses fell completely silent on the third day of the landing on the planet. Commissar Yarrick at that point ordered every remaining aircraft on Armageddon to be thrown into the battle in a desperate measure to destroy as much of Ghazghkull forces as possible before they reached the ground, or destroy the majority of their aircrafts and transports before they were fully operational and capable of taking control of the skies, like it would happen in Elsrich. In the yellow skies over Armageddon, hordes of orc fighter bombers dueled with Imperial Thunderbolts and Furies. It would be a losing battle, but thanks to the sacrifice of many good pilots, in many places on Armageddon, the Orcs will be denied air superiority, leaving the forces on the ground without support from above for the duration of the war in many cases. After 5 days from the landing, as the aerial battles reached their peak, Acheron Hive fell to the Orcs without warning, captured from within seemingly without a single shot fired. Garbon reports coming from the Hive spoke of power grids sabotaged and the Orcs boiling out from secret access tunnels at the very heart of the metropolis. The instigator of these foul crimes was soon revealed to be none other than the infamous fugitive and war criminal Hermann von Straub, the former overlord of Armageddon that Dante ordered arrested during the first invasion of Ghazghkull. Von Straub took control of the Hive as its new overlord, announcing that it was his divine right to rule over Armageddon. Orc brute squads stood ready to silence any dissenters who doubted Von Straub's claim to power. Despicably, much of the old nobility in Acheron welcomed back Von Straub as a long-lost prince, choosing to genteelly ignore the fact that he had just allied with some of the most dangerous aliens in the galaxy.
Yeah, Von Straub just shows to you that there is only one reality in the universe of 40k. Bold people are evil. Never trust them.
At High Volcanoes, on the same day of the fall of Acheron, massed Orc infantry surged over the 20 square miles of defenses atop Volcanoes Mountain just beyond the Hive's outer suburbs. 17 garrison regiments of Armageddon Hive militia were routed, and the Orcs captured many weapons and fortifications intact. Volcanoes itself was soon besieged, surrounded by a ring of Orcish steel and relentlessly pounded by captured macro cannons and barrage bombs. Outside Hive Deathmire, the war went better. The Titans of Legios Tempestor and Victorum, with their supporting regiments of Skitari, virtually annihilated the Orc Blackfire tribe in a 3-day running battle across the plain of Antrad. But the Orc landers fell from the skies like a relentless storm, and fighting spread across Armageddon like a forest fire, until every hive and factory complex was embroiled. In many places, Orc attacks were beaten off, but again and again the Orcs would regroup and attack within hours, stretching the defenders to their limit. Now around a week has passed in the war, and in this time frame, we have 2 battles to cover. Both of them happened a week after the landings started on Armageddon. The first we will cover is the Battle of Dante's Canyon. The Battle of Dante's Canyon was a battle fought between the forces of the White Scars deployed in the Deadlands of Armageddon, pretty much an entire continent covered in snow and ice, and the forces of the Orcs' White Lightning Speed Cult. The Tulvar Brotherhood, which is the equivalent of the 4th Company of the White Scars, under the direct command of Suboden Khan, are deployed in the Deadlands with the mission of denying several facilities of promethium extraction and refinement to the Orcs. They had already destroyed a number of them in preparation for the invasion of Armageddon, leaving the last one standing to lure the Orcs in a trap and take out as many as they could in one single swoop. DC Drilling Station was a facility built in Dante's Canyon, suspended over an unsafe and ever-shifting sheet of ice that was directly over the deep waters of Armageddon. The facility was sustained by a system of metal cables that kept it suspended over the ice as it drilled through the oceans of Armageddon, extracting oil that would be refined on the platform itself and then would be sent to various hive cities south of Armageddon with a system of pipes built on pylons over the ice. The White Scars mission was simple, negating the facility to the Orcs, protect it if they attempted to destroy it. The initial assault from the Orcs was met with disaster. The Orcs' war machines were too heavy and they simply broke through the ice, sending the vehicles and their occupants to a frigid death in the ice-cold waters of the Tempest Ocean. But the Orcs would learn from this, modifying the war bikes and war trucks with skis and various other forms of stabilization so that they could ride safely in the ice. Suboden Khan had ordered the walls of the Ice Canyon to be booby-trapped with explosives. The plan was simple: lure the Orcs into the narrow bottleneck of the canyon, and as they pass, detonate the charges and make the walls collapse on them. They knew that would not kill all of them, but an high number was better than nothing. As a group of scouts lured the Orcs towards the trap, the majority of the company's force intercepted the Orcs on the ice on their motorcycles. Their librarian using his powers to move the snow to create cover and to raise ice to make the Orcs' war machines crash. The two sides would end up fighting each other in a lightning battle on the ice on moving vehicles. The White Scars moving from target to kill as many as possible, or even attack them with melee weapons if they entered in range. As the majority of the Orcs entered the bottleneck, the Space Marines started their retreat as the timed charges started detonating in the canyon.
The first explosion was a surprise, even though you'd known it was coming. The song was cut short as a newer, more insistent sound washed over them, subsuming all other noises into itself. Despite their best efforts, they'd barely cleared the first hurdle. Canim knew. The icy face of the canyon walls ruptured with a roar that set his bones to trembling in their envelope of meat and muscle. A cloud of frost rose up as ice struck ice, and the surface beneath his wheels bucked and twisted upwards. The bike hurtled through the air and crashed down hard, jolting him in his seat as he slewed sideways. "Ride," he rolled out, as if his voice could lend speed to the wheels of his brothers. "Ride, and do not look back." The white scars rolled on, dodging the serpentine cracks that pursued them with as much tenacity as the orcs who scrambled in their wake. The greenskin did not yet understand their peril, though Cannon fancied that when the second explosion occurred just ahead of him, the smarter ones finally grasped the edges of the situation. A second cloud of frost, larger than the first, swept towards the white scars, who pierced it without slowing. To slow down now meant death. Speed was their weapon now.
With some losses, the White Scars managed to halt the advance of the main ground force of the Orcs towards the platform. But the Orc flyers instead managed to reach the platform, finding the rest of the force of White Scars waiting there for them. A violent battle ensued on the drilling platform as the Orcs started landing in higher and higher numbers on it. Clashing against the White Scars that, while successful in repelling them in the beginning, were soon starting to be overrun by the encroaching Orcs. In the end, the warboss of the Speed Cult landed violently on the platform with his plane. A giant Orc covered in an almost suit of power armor, that started slaughtering both his own and the White Scars as he went in an angry rampage against anything he could see, while at the same time starting to attack the cable supports of the oil platform, trying to sink it into the ocean. Suboden Khan and his assault squad would end up entering the battle at the last moment. His squad and the Khan himself surrounding the Orc and dealing with the rest of his forces once Suboden Khan had engaged it in single combat. The battle was well fought by both sides, but in the end Suboden would impale the Orc through his neck with his power spear, and after the Orc finally managed to dislodge it, used his short sword to decapitate it in a single swoop, taking his head as a trophy. The Orcs, broken and with their war boss dead, ended up retreating from the attack. The remnants of them on the platform dealt with by the remaining White Scar forces before they decided to redeploy somewhere else. But at the same time, another battle was being fought. The confrontation at Hive Infernos. A week after the invasion had commenced, Orc forces punched through the Imperial defense north of Hive Infernos. As Orcs streamed through the breach, elements of the Dark Angels 5th Company, under command of Brother Captain Anderson, rushed to secure a vital communication relay installation. As they approached their objective, they spotted a large dust cloud to the north, heralding the imminent arrival of Warlord Chugrim Clubboss. Both forces charged head first, and a bloody battle ensued. At the beginning of the battle, the Orcs had the upper hand. The Blitz Brigade caused heavy casualties that the small Space Marine army could ill afford to lose. From that point on, however, the pendulum swung in favor of the Marines. A misjudged charge by the assault Marines of Captain Anderson resulted in them being completely wiped out against a larger number of forces, giving the opportunity to the Orcs to regroup in number and counterattack the Dark Angel forces on the battlefield. The Dark Angels were soon overwhelmed and forced to scatter, retreating back and leaving the installation to the Orcs.
Just to break off from the narration a bit, have you subscribed yet? No? Why not? Okay, you know what? I'm not asking nicely now. I let Grimaldo speak for me.
Do it! Now!
As Yarrick had predicted, Ghazghkull's strategies proved deadly. The Orcs kept an iron grip on Armageddon skies. Orbital bombardments and fighter bombers pounded Imperial forces wherever they tried to form a battle line, pinning them in place while further landings were made to surround them. Where the Orcs were outnumbered, they fought a guerrilla war, striking at their foes and withdrawing into the harsh wastelands before retribution could arrive. Ghazghkull had learned enough from the last invasion to prepare his plans so that the fight was scattered and chaotic. Precisely the conditions in which Orc warbands thrive and Imperial regiments were denied the support and coordination they needed to fight back effectively. The only force which consistently defeated the Orcs was the Adeptus Astartes, and the Space Marines constantly scoured the hinterlands of Armageddon on search and destroy missions to eliminate the Greenskins at any opportunity. As the battles raged on the planet, Ghazghkull unleashed another of his carefully prepared surprises. Incredibly, dozens of the great asteroid fortresses encountered by Admiral Parol's ships began to descend from orbit. Slowed by powerful force fields, rockets and modified tractor cannons, the Orc rocks made landings in the Verdan equatorial jungles and across Armageddon Primus and Secundus. Many were lost to ground fire or accidents, but each one that survived became a bastion for the Orcs, a rallying point and a ready-made fortress. As well as their huge guns and missile batteries, the rocks contained giant teleport arrays like those first used by Ghazghkull in his Piscina campaign. These were employed to teleport down orc reinforcements, including gargants and heavy artillery. Commissar Yarrick personally led attacks by Cadian shock troops supported by the Titans of Legio Metallica and Legio Ignatum, which destroyed several of the fortresses. But bloody battles around many others consumed whole regiments in hours. For the rest of the war, the Space Marines bore the brunt of eliminating the orc fortresses where they could. The Salamanders chapter winning particular acclaim for the successes against fortresses along the Hemlock River. Let's return to Elsrich now. Several days have passed. Millions of orcs had amassed outside of the city, including artillery, gargants, tanks, transports. The commanders of the city requested for Legio Invigilata to reach the walls in support of its defenses. But while the Warlord Titans, flanked by the Imperator Titan of Zaha, were deadly foes, and managed to destroy several Stompas and Gargants, they were not enough to stop the advance of the orcs. The walls were breached and grounded to dust by the orc advance.
Sons of Dawn! Knights of the Emperor! Charge!
At that point, the plan of defense was sprung into action. Companies of Imperial Guard and Steel Legion will defend section after section of the Hive City, supported by the Space Marines of the Black Templars and the Titans of Legio Invigilata, holding every piece of ground with flesh and bone until it could no longer be held, retreating over and over again to pre-established checkpoints of defense to keep the orcs at bay as long as possible. 14 days after the initial orc landing, the first major confrontation between orc and Imperial war engines occurred. A 10-day battle raged over the Diabolus factory complex, as the Gargant mobs of Warlord Burzuruk and Warlord Scarfang clashed with the Titans of Legio Crucius. 6 Titans and 8 Gargants were utterly destroyed in the fighting, and many others needed months of repair before they could fight again. The Diabolus complex was wrecked during the battle, its foundries and machine shops blasted apart or crushed underfoot by giant fighting machines. In the aftermath of the battle, orc speedcalls swiftly encircled Hive Infernos, cutting it off from all outside help. Mechanized counterattacks into the Ash Wastes met with initial success, but when an entire regiment of Savlar Chemdogs was surrounded and wiped out by the Speed Freaks, further attempts to break out were abandoned by those inside. As the beleaguered defenders pondered how to lift the siege, reports came in of a vast orc horde rounding the Palidus Mountains from the northeast. Soon, the horde was visible from the Hive Spire, a great sea of warriors which seemed to fill the empty expanse of the Ash Wastes to overflowing. Towering Gargants strode through the tide, like grey ships rolling on a green sea. The guttural war chants of the orcs could be heard from over 20 miles away, the ground shaking with their progress. Worst of all, the countless banner poles swaying over the horde bore the personal glyph of the mighty Ghazghkull himself. As the skies darkened beneath the shadow of orc space hulks high above, and the first orbital bombardments crashed down, the citizens of Infernus knew that their doom was upon them. They made what preparations they could with preternatural calm, commending their souls to the Emperor as they built barricades or distributed weapons and ammunition to the troops. They tried to take inspiration from the legends of Commissar Yarrick, and how he made the orcs pay for every inch of ground at Hive Hades. But not all were brave enough to face their doom. Thousands fled into the wastes to be killed or captured by speedcalls, which circled the Hive like vultures over a carcass. The Adeptus Arbatis soon moved to secure the Hive, turning back or executing any who failed in their duty to the Emperor. As Ghazghkull's horde came within range, the last grey siege guns of Infernus pounded at them, lobbing giant shells into the mass of greenskins until return fire from the orbiting hulks smashed them apart. In the brief calm that followed, Ghazghkull delivered to the defenders of Infernus Hive a messenger. It was Colonel Gorath of the Savlar Chemdogs, horribly mutilated and missing his eyes and hands. The message that the Colonel bore was a simple one, which would be heard many times across Armageddon in the months to come.
Surrender or die!
Returning to Hive Elsrich.
Danny, the video is too long. I can see some members of the audience have fallen asleep.
And what are you waiting for? Wake them!
How?
Find a way!
Well, I have this flashbang.
Use it! Okay, now that everyone is awake, we return to Elsrich once again. It has been days of violent fighting and terrible losses. Various space marines of the Templars died in operations to recover territory lost to the Orcs, or simply in its defense, fighting to the end side by side with the defenders of Elsrich. On the 18th day from the beginning of the invasion, the Orcs finally managed to breach and establish a foothold on Hell's Highway, pushing the defenders out of it. Hell's Highway was a giant roadway that bisected the Hive City of Elsrich in half. With the control of it in the hands of the Orcs, now they truly could run rampant in the Hive City with no way to reliably stop them.
It was always going to happen. That did not make reality any easier to bear, or the defeat any less bitter. But preparations were in place. When it happened, the Imperials were ready. It happened first on the 18th day, at the Amalas Concourse, junction Omega 9B34. That was its assigned identifier according to the Imperial hololithic displays. Colonel Saren was watching through heavy, fatigue-dulled eyes as the flickering holo images moved silently back from the location of their barricade. It was such a small thing, no more than a few marking runes blinking back a few centimeters, moving away from the point of the map marked Amalas Concourse, junction Omega 9B34. Behind the flickering holo runes was an illusory ramp, which in turn threaded into a much wider road. Saren watched the runes falling back along this ramp, and tried to breathe in. It took 4 attempts, his breath catching in his throat on the first 3.
This is Colonel Saren.
He spoke into his handbox.
All units in Omega Sector, Subsector 9. All units prepare to retreat. Cancel assigned fallback locations. Repeat, cancel withdrawal to assigned fallback locations. When the order comes, you will retreat. Retreat to contingency positions.
He ignored the storm of demands for confirmation, letting his Vox officers respond on his behalf.
We did well,
he said to himself.
We did damn well to keep the bastards away for this long.
18 days. Over half a month of siege warfare. He had every reason to color his bitterness with that fierce core of pride.
And finally, we moved to the 36th day. The city was burning. More than half of it was already under the control of the Orcs. Titans were falling. Soldiers were dying. Losses were well in the millions by this point for the Imperials. Even Grimaldo's personal squad suffered a casualty. Brother Kador had died, killed on patrol on Hell's Highway. The situation was desperate to say the least. Even Titans had fallen by this point. Jurisian was still working into entering Oberon's bunker, but for now, with scarce success. But the worst was yet to come. The Orcs that had landed all around in the Deadlands, at Armageddon's southern polar territory, or even in the north, at the Fire Wastes, finally revealed their cards. Their landing was a mystery even for Yarrick, that could not understand why the Orcs had landed where there was pretty much nothing, but he would soon find out. The Orcs in the dead regions of Armageddon had repurposed their landing crafts into submersiles, and hundreds of them were now traveling the polluted waters of the oceans to reach Hive Elsrich and Hive Tempestora. On their way, the fleet will destroy the Valdez oil platforms. 3 platforms for oil extraction known as Jannam, Sheol, and Lucifus, but that would be their mistake. While they would end up taking Hive Tempestora completely by surprise, Lucifus' platform managed to relay a warning to Elsrich before being destroyed. The attack was massive, and it would land at the docks of Elsrich on the same day. There was no way to redeploy enough troops to stop it. They were all either busy fighting on other fronts, or there was no way to evacuate the dock workers and send in the real soldiers before the attack arrived.
Keep in mind, this entire battle is completely absent from the animated movie of Elsrich, so if you have not read the book you wouldn't even know it happened at all.
Then an idea would arise from Dockmaster Magernos, one of the characters excluded from the animation on YouTube. Arm the dock workers. Send in as many soldiers as possible now so that they can lead the dock workers in battle. They will try to hold as long as possible until it was possible to redeploy enough troops to keep the docks. Grimaldus and his Black Templars would redeploy in full force at the docks, but they weren't enough to stop the invasion on its feet, only delayed further with the help of a few stormtrooper squadrons and thousands of untrained dock workers.
The first vessels crashed into the docks with the noise of a storm wave breaking against the shore. With no finesse, without even slowing down, they crunched into the gangways and loading platforms, ferociously beaching themselves. Doors and portals immediately blasted open, disgorging a tide of foul alien flesh onto the docks. The very first of the alien beasts to spill from its underwater scrap pod was a brute, easily half again the size of its lesser brethren, bearing a trophy rack on its hunched shoulders with human skulls and Astartes helms from other wars on other worlds. It had been leading its tribe across the edges of the Imperium for decades, and in a fight with all else even, would have been more than a match for alone Astartes. Its face, shoulder and torso disintegrated in a ruthless volley of last fire that sent the burning remains spinning off the edge of the docks and into the polluted water below. Less than 100 meters away, Domoska shouted encouragement to the dock workers she led, and ordered them to fire again. Many had missed, but more than enough had struck home. It was a pattern being repeated along the Hell's Reach docks now, and the first wave of Xenos creatures howled and laughed their way into the city. From his makeshift cover within the den of loosely stacked cargo containers, Magurnus fired shot after shot, feeling the rifle in his hands growing warmer with each crack of release. He lowered himself below the lip of the crate he knelt behind, and reloaded his last gun with inexpert fingers. The bastard thing was stuck.
Thousands of humans would die. Even a number of Black Templars would, as the fighting at the docks became fiercer and fiercer. In the skies of Hell's-Reach, aircrafts and vessels of the Imperium and the Orcs were still fighting as the Orcs overran the docks. The problem was now that the forces engaged at the docks couldn't even focus on pushing back the attackers. The Orcs had started assaulting the civilian bunkers and defenses, cracking them open to slaughter all that were inside. Every single man and Astarte available was bogged down fighting the Orcs off from their civilian targets. Grimaldus and his squad had joined in the defense of one such bunker too. Both Nerovar and Arterion would be wounded in this engagement, before getting saved by Andre, Magernus, and the rest of their surviving team of dock workers.
Hello, Reclusiarch!
What in the end will save the docks and the entirety of Hell's-Reach from being overrun will be the reinforcements sent by a strike cruiser, the Serpentine. Shielded physically by the mighty bulk of the Eternal Crusader, the flagship of the Black Templars, the Serpentine deployed on the planet reinforcements. The last 70 salamanders under the command of Sergeant Vret deployed by drop pod in Hell's-Reach by order of Chapter Master Tushan of the Salamanders, with orders to help the Black Templars to hold the docks, and then rejoin him in the battles at the banks of the Hemlock River.
I am honored to fight at your side, Reclusiarch Grimaldus. The Templars are in your debt, but tell me, brother, why have you come?
We were the last of the salamanders in orbit. The Lord of the Fireborn called us to him, and we obeyed.
Master Tushan, may the Emperor continue to favor him, fights far from here, brother. The salamanders bleed the enemy many leagues to the east, and the Hemlock River runs black with alien blood.
The salamanders were not blind to your plight, honored Reclusiarch. My lord and master heard of the assured civilian devastation in the fall of the city's coastal districts. We are the 70 warriors chosen to make planetfall here, and stand with you until the docks are held.
And then you will leave.
And then we will leave. Our fight is along the banks of the Hemlock. Our glory is there. This city, it smells like home.
The Salamanders would fight until they were sure the invasion at the docks wouldn't overrun the city, and until they had safeguarded all the civilian bunkers the Orcs were aiming at before leaving the city to rejoin their chapter. Unfortunately, at this point, it was visible to everyone that Hive Hell's-Reach would fall. But they still had to fight to the end to keep the Orcs busy, as every Orc fighting in Hell's-Reach meant one less Orc attacking other Hive cities. And now we move away from Hell's-Reach one final time. We will return in just a second. Now we have to go back a bit, to before the Third War for Armageddon. Time to finish the story of Captain Erasmus Tycho. After the Second War for Armageddon, it became clear that all was not right with Captain Tycho. He was no longer able to relax in the blessed halls of the chapter's fortress like he would do before, for its beauty served only to remind him of his own mutilation. He would be assigned to active battle duty permanently, under recommendation to Dante of Chaplain Vermento.
Since his grievous wounding at the battle for Armageddon, Tycho has become increasingly violent of temperament and attitude. It is my strongest recommendation to assign Brother Captain Tycho to active battle duty permanently.
Dante reluctantly obliged, yet even in combat duty he was ever more violent of both temperament and attitude, and his tactics became audacious to the point of self-destruction. And when the Third War for Armageddon started, Tycho was forced to reach the world to fight on it once again. Now, there isn't a specific timeline of events here, but seeing that Tycho fought at Tempestora after it had fallen, we can be sure that this happened after the 36th day of the invasion.
Finally, when Ghazghkull returned to Armageddon and Tycho revisited the war that had seen him mutilated so many years before, his mind snapped. Lost in the depths of rage, the captain took his place in the Death Company. At the head of a seething mass of raving, delusional battle brothers, Tycho led the assault upon the breach at the orc-held hive of Tempestora. Though his charge carried the day, and though the ferocity of his assault has since become legend, the captain fell at the last. In death he found redemption, his twisted face setting into an image of serenity. It is whispered into the halls of the apothecarian that when his half-mask was removed during the funeral rites, not a single hint of disfigurement could be found.
Captain Tycho, a paradigm of discipline and strength, considered the successor to Dante from many in the chapter, fell to one of the two curses of the Blood Angels, the Black Rage, a madness induced by the psychic backlash from the death of Sanguinius that still echoes in the warp. All of his children are at one point destined to lose their internal struggle for control. They will start seeing themselves as Sanguinius, and all those they have around as Horus. They will go completely mad and start killing indiscriminately both friend or foe. This is how an angel falls, and the perfect example of both sides of the noble Blood Angels, always fighting a battle on both sides, outside against the enemies of the Imperium, and inside against their own demons, forever struggling to not turn into crazed homicidal monsters. Returning to Elstrich, by the time the Salamanders left the city, the fighting was going on from 5 weeks. At this point in Elstrich, very little remained of both command and forces. So, the High Command decided that the best course of action was for the armies to break up and form battle groups around the Hive for their own last stand. Grimaldus and the Black Templars left in the city, a total of 35 counting Jurisian, that had now finally unlocked the Bunker of Oberon and was putting it back into action before returning to the city, decided that the best place to die in Elstrich would be the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant, the first temple ever founded in the entirety of Armageddon by the first settlers. But as this was happening, a great danger was approaching Elstrich, something even what was left of Zaha and their titans would have an hard time stopping.
The giant stood above its worshippers in silence. Its skin and bones were harvested from crashed and salvaged ships. Each column, gear, pylon, girder, and plate of armor that went into its birth, stolen from something else. Although the giant was not alive, living creatures served it in place of blood and organs. They clambered through the god's form, insulated by the armor, hanging from the metal bones, moving like the blood cells in sluggish arteries. The giant had taken over 2,000 laborers over a month to build. It had finally awoken outside the walls of Hive Stygia 3 days before, to great roars of praise from its devoted faithful. And then, in its first hours of life, it had wiped the Hive City from the face of the planet. Stygia was a modest industrial city, defended by the Steel Legion and its own militia with little in the way of Astartes or mechanical support. From the moment the giant awoke to the moment the last vestiges of organized imperial resistance was crushed, the city lasted a total of 5 hours and 32 minutes. And now the giant stood silent, idle, making ready for its journey south. Its face was piggish and round-eyed, all jagged jaw and red iron tusks. Behind the broken windows that served as its eyes, hunched crew members moved in loping gaits, attending to their bestial imitation of Imperial Titan command. The giant's name, splattered across its ugly, fat-bellied hull in crude alien hieroglyphs, was Godbreaker. With a slow tread that shook the earth around it, Godbreaker began to move south, towards the coast. towards Ellsreach.
The Mega Gargant Godbreaker will soon reach Ellsreach, and wreak havoc on what was left of the city. As the last 35 Black Templars assembled at the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant, Godbreaker will reach the city, decimating the battle group left of Legio Invigilata before engaging Storm Herald itself. The Mega Gargant and the Titan battled brutally, but Zaha was consumed by the long battles she had been fighting. Storm Herald was damaged and in dire need of refitting. A single shot could have made a difference, as the Plasma Annihilator was the only chance they had to destroy Godbreaker. But unfortunately, the aiming system was offline. And even if the Moderati Primus took the shot, Shuri would hit the Mega Gargant, he missed. The same shot would end up stalling the reactor of Storm Herald. Storm Herald was defiant until the end against the Orc Metal Beast, but in the end, the Titan will be destroyed by Godbreaker, and Zara killed with it.
This is where men cried.
At the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant, what was left of Squad Grimaldus, together with Emperor's champion Bayard and the rest of the Black Templars left in the city, was preparing their last stand supported by the Sisters of the Order of the Argent Shroud present at the temple, bolstered by the Imperial Guard survivors slowly reaching the temple for their final battle. When the Orcs arrived, the entire army started fighting them back, with the Black Templars hitting the endless army of Orcs encroaching on them like the tip of a spear. In the fighting, several of them will die. Even the venerated Emperor's champion Bayard will be killed, a spear impaling him from the throat on a tombstone. The Marines encircled the body of the fallen champion, both to recover his venerated Jinsid, but mainly to recover the Black Blade, a legendary artifact that must always stay with the Black Templars. In fact, with the death of Bayard, only Priamus was left that was worthy of wielding it. Grimaldus declared him the last Emperor's champion of the Ellsreach Crusade, entrusting the blade to him.
Priamus, Reclusiac, you are the last Emperor's champion of the Ellsreach Crusade. Now, recover your blade.
Slowly but surely, the defenders were being pushed back to the gates of the cathedral. It is then that Godbreaker became visible in the distance, moving towards the temple to erase it from existence. Moving outside the city as this was happening, as it was protocol for Invigilata, the Titans that were left were leaving the city to rejoin their Legio for good at the banks of the Hemlock River. It is while they were retreating that Jurisian would arrive at Ellsreach with Oberon. The Titans saw him and started converging on him. Now 4 Titans barred his path. Their new temporary leader, the Warlord Titan Baneside, commanded by Princeps Amasat. They wanted Jurisian out of Oberon, no matter if alive or dead. But Jurisian knew they wouldn't risk damaging the Ordinatus Armageddon just to kill him. He was going back into the city, and by the Emperor, they were going to come with him. Jurisian was ordered by Grimaldus to come into the city, destroy Godbreaker, and then leave to reach the Hemlock River himself. So he made a deal with the remnants of the Titans of Legio Invigilata. They would escort Oberon into the city so that he can fire his shot at Godbreaker, and then he would relinquish control of Oberon to the Mechanicus as they fled to the Hemlock River. Seeing no alternatives, the Titans accepted the offer. A race against time started as the Titans and Oberon rushed into the city. The Warlord and his comrades blasting through any defense barring the way of Oberon to reach the temple before it was annihilated. But they weren't fast enough. It is then that Princeps Amasat of Baneside decided to commit to the ultimate sacrifice. He started moving faster than all others, leaving 2 Warhounds to protect the weapon as it rushed to the temple. Knowing that it had no chance of taking down Godbreaker, but he could still distract it for long enough for Oberon to be in range.
The Baneside, named for a shrieking monster from ancient Terran mythology, did everything in its power to gain the Godbreaker's attention. Opening salvos from its arm cannons and shoulder-mounted weapon batteries lashed against the larger Titan's force fields. Siren horns, used to warn loyal infantry of the Titans passing close, or even through their regiments, bled now at the enemy engine. Whatever primitive communications array passed for a Vox system on board the Godbreaker was scrambled into white noise by a focused spike of machine coded from Baneside's tech adepts. All of these was enough to drag the towering beast machine away from its intent to flatten the temple of the Emperor Ascendant. The Warlord, 33 meters of armor plating and city-killing weaponry forged into an iconic image of the machine god himself, began its shameful retreat. All guns fired at will as it clanked backwards, drawing the Godbreaker away from the last Imperials alive in the Hive's most sacred sector.
Unfortunately, the Titan wouldn't survive the diversion, but he would create the perfect conditions to take down Godbreaker once and for all.
Baneside tore clean through the Hell's Highway when it fell. The warlord had made it half a kilometer before its void shields burst out of existence, and its front-facing armor began to suffer the assault from the Godbreaker's guns. No matter how thick the ceramite and adamantium plating covering the world's vital systems, the sheer level of firepower hurled at Baneside meant that once its shields died, its existence was measured in minutes. It was perhaps unfair that such a noble example of the Invigilatus god machines met its end as a sacrificial lure, but within the Liege's archives, both Baneside and her command crew were given the highest honors. The wreckage of the Titan will come to be salvaged by the Mechanicus in the following weeks, and restored to working order 14 months later. Its destruction at Elsbridge was marked upon its carapace with a 6-meter square engraved image upon its right shin, depicting a weeping angel over a burning metallic skeleton. Unable to withstand any more punishment, with flames pouring from its bridge, the great warlord fell backwards on howling joints. Its immense weight was enough to break the rock-cut columns holding up the Hell's Highway, sending the Baneside and a significant section of the main road crashing down to land in a mountain of rubble. The Godbreaker stood over the crater of a broken road, as if staring down at the body of its latest kill. 14 seconds after the warlord's shattered remains came to a rest, a flare of sun-bright and fusion-hot energy screamed across the Hell's Highway. It was the shape of a newborn star, flaring with arcing coils of plasma light and surrounded by a blinding corona.
Engine. Kill.
While the Mega Gargant was gone though, the battle was not over. Jurisian and the rest of Invigilata finally retreated, and the defenders of the temple were pushed back more and more, until the orcs breached the gates of the temple for good.
I have dug my grave in this place. I will either triumph or I will die. No pity, no remorse, no fear.
The remaining Space Marines, Sisters of Battle and human defenders fought until the end, but very few would survive when the guns of the orcs brought down the entire temple on their heads.
I will die on this world. I will die on Armageddon.
Of the Space Marines, only Grimaldus will be left alive. Of the human defenders, only Andre and a few others still lived. Grimaldus seemed to survive by a miracle, clawing his way out of the rubble after the battle was over, more bones broken than he had left intact, and managing to save, thanks to some servitors, some relics of the temple of the Emperor's Ascendant.
I heard you were very injured, yes? Not enough to kill me. The reports I have heard indicated no one else survived the fall of the Basilica. Yes, that would make for a wonderful story, no? The last Black Knight, the only survivor of the greatest battle in Hell's Reach. I apologize for surviving and breaking the flow of your legend, Reclusiac. I promise most faithfully that I and the 6 or 7 others will be very quiet and let you have all the thunder.
Were you not injured at all?
Yeah, I had a headache, but then it went away.
This makes me smile.
The Battle of Elsrich was over, and soon the Season of Fire of Armageddon will make the entirety of the planet impossible to fight on. The orcs, thanks to the efforts of the defenders, managed to grasp no more than a weak hold of the city. Reinforcements will come to Elsrich and drive out the invaders for good, reclaiming it in the name of the Imperium of Men. Now, here we come to a bit of a problem in the timeline of the war for Armageddon, regarding the death of the now traitorous Overlord Hermann von Straub. The 4th edition Orc Codex says that von Straub was killed by the efforts of a unit of the Last Chancers before the Season of Fire broke out, which is actually a good placing in the timeline. The problem is that the book covering this, which is the 3rd novel in the Last Chancer series known as Annihilation Squad, says that von Straub was killed 3 years after the start of the fighting, and not before the first Season of Fire during the war on Armageddon.
So, who do we believe?
Well, technically Annihilation Squad, which is a novel of Gavtorp, the 40k writer known for not believing in canon and consistent lore, is good to go. The only problem is that the novel in the timeline takes place in 001 M42, which is in the current timeline after the fall of Cadia and the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum, while the Codex 4th edition of the Orcs, that came out 4 years later, places it just a few months into the war. So I will say that the events of the novel are indeed canon. They have no reason not to be. But the timeline is not 3 years after the start of the Third War for Armageddon, but just a few months after. To be honest, for how much I dislike Gavtorp, and for how much his writing is boring and tedious, this novel is not so bad in the end. No reason to follow all of it, as there isn't major events that influence the war in any way, but the ending of the novel itself. In this book we also meet Lori, the last biological between giant quotations, daughter of Macarius, the last surviving of 500 in fact.
The fuck did you just say? Was the man half rabbit or something?
What's the matter, Lori? Schaefer says. It is not a guilty secret to be ashamed of and kept hidden. Not like some low-born lover to a governess. Tell them who you are and be proud of it. Her expression turns to one of sadness. She looks pleadingly at the colonel, who steps back and looks away, arms crossed. She looks at the others, and then me. I was one of 500 brothers and sisters, she says, looking down, head bowed. We were bred from the seed of Macarius himself in an incubator. We were fed on artificial stimulants, and combat doctrine was pumped straight into our minds. She falls silent, hands shakingly balled into fists in her lap, her shoulders shaking with anger. They thought they could make a perfect soldier, the colonel says, without turning around. They took the seed of the great Macarius without his knowledge just before he died. For centuries they labored in secret, their goal shunned by other tech priests. They did well, considering. 500 healthy babies were created out of 50,000 attempts. 5 companies of soldiers were raised from their unnatural births to fight. I'm the last one, says Lori, still gazing at the old slicked floor. Then she looks up, her eyes brimming with tears. She looks at me, and her anger returns. When Loron died, I was the only one left. You think you suffered, believing you were the only one of us to survive Corita Norum? What if you were the only living proof of an obscene experiment performed by outcasts and heretics? The tech priests understand the working of the body, even the mind, and the ways it can be manipulated, says the colonel. But they know nothing of the soul. In all of their teachings, they forgot about one thing. Fate. Fate in the Emperor. So, what happened to the others? I ask. I know your company was all but wiped out in an air attack, but what happened to the other 4? Killed in battle. All of them, says Lori. Onaikar 4, Methuselah, Lazarus Secunda. They were on their own, shunned by the other regiments, easy targets.
Poor woman, even if it is surprising seeing a daughter of Macarius in the Last Chancers.
She would unfortunately die during the events of the book, killed by the protagonist of this book, Lieutenant Cage of the 13th Penal Legion, a latent psyker that at that point in the story was being possessed by a demon that slowly was taking control of his body and mind. In a blackout in which the demon took control, he killed her in melee combat. Another reason to dislike Gavtorp. Lori was my book waifu. Anyway, going over the story broadly. The Last Chancers will reach Armageddon and secretly infiltrate it, by having to fight through a great deal of orcs to reach Hive Acheron, find Von Strab and eliminate him, as his political influence on Armageddon risks swaying its defenders into joining him and the orcs in the fighting. Even as we later see in the book, he himself wanted to be rescued as he was pretty much kept as a political prisoner by Ghazghkull, forced to enact his will to not die. So, technically by this book, Von Strab is a spineless and weak leader that sold out his own people to not be instantly killed by Ghazghkull and his Wa, but at the same time he's not fully traitor. This mission came with a strict time limit, as the Inquisition had already sent various missions and squads into Acheron Hive to find Von Strab, but all had disappeared without a trace, never even finding him. And now the Inquisition had requested for a detachment of Marines Malevolent in orbit with their battle barge to disengage from its duties and bomb Acheron to dust, together with all the people and orcs inside, just to get Von Strab. Through a lot of various events, battles, and a lot of traveling, in the end they will find Overlord Von Strab. And Lieutenant Cage will turn traitor on his own men and Colonel Schaefer under the influence of the demon possessing him, leading to the capture of the entire penal detachment sent to kill Von Strab. In a moment of clarity caused by a blank sent by the Inquisition with the squad, as the penal detachment was getting executed by being thrown into a sea of lava inside Acheron Hive, Lieutenant Cage will decide that instead of being taken over by a demon, it was better to complete the mission and fulfill his last chance of redemption in front of the Emperor of Mankind.
The Emperor will not remember you by your medals and diplomas, but by your scars. It is not only in death that we offer up our lives to him, but also in life. We are not judged merely by the manner of our deaths. We do not earn his eternal grace merely by dying in his name. It is by the way we live out our lives before we die that defines who we were. It is easy to sacrifice a body, for it's nothing more than a mortal shell for our soul. To sacrifice your life, not your death, is the ultimate test of faith. It is a test I've always failed. I have lied, and cheated, and killed my fellow man for my own reasons. I have squandered the opportunities for glory that I was given. Time and again, I stood upon the precipice of true sacrifice and turned away. Von Straub's look of triumph turns to horror as I fling my arms around him, lifting him off the ground. I see Von Spank's astonished face flash past as I drive forward with the Overlord in my arms, the panicked bellows of Uruk sounding in my ears. His legs hit the rope barrier and buckle, and my momentum carries us forwards, toppling us head over heels into the precipice. Now I truly understand what it means to have a last chance. I'm glad I finally took it.
Cage and Von Straub will fall directly into the lava. Von Straub will be killed in it. But miraculously, Cage will survive. We will cover how his story continues later in the timeline. Now, generally for how the war is going in this period on Armageddon, the situation is, to put it simply, desperate. The fighting was violent on the entirety of the territory of the planet. The Orcs had conquered over half of Armageddon itself in a matter of months, and more greenskin reinforcements arrived as the word of the invasion by Ghazghkull spread around the other Orc clans. Millions upon millions of them would rush to reach Armageddon to take part in the warfare, making the situation even more desperate. In the Howling Ash Wastes, the Space Marines began to establish battle lines, holding out against even the fiercest of onslaughts. More and more troops were committed to the meat grinder as Imperial forces, bound for the war against the tyrannid menace on the eastern fringes, were diverted to the Armageddon sector to join the fighting. That would lead to one of the biggest battles between mechanized infantry in the entirety of the Third War for Armageddon, known as the Battle of Gatana Bay, or simply as the Battle for Gate 9. During the Third War for Armageddon, the largest recorded Dreadnought versus Dreadnought confrontation occurred during the attack on the Gatana Bay water processing plant. Water would be a key resource on Armageddon when the fire season arrived, and Gatana Bay was the source of every drop reaching Armageddon Prime. The Orc attack on the plant had stalled badly. Options were now running out for the Orc warlord Jadrog Irontooth, and he committed every Dreadnought and Killer Khan in his force to a single attack, aiming for a point in the Space Marine line weakened by an earlier commando attack. Over 100 Orc machines stomped forward in a densely packed phalanx. The defenders were battered by the Orc weaponry, their positions swept by the sheer weight of fire. Landspeeder squadrons were blasted from the skies by mass big shooters, while bunker after bunker was silenced by salvos of Orc rockets. Jadrog's charge breached the defenses and burst onto one of the plant's access roads, leading between towering purification tanks. The Orc machines rumbled on, their power claws ripping each successive gate apart as they pressed deeper into the plant. As they approached Gate 9, however, they were surprised to see the barrier rise to reveal a line of 8 Space Marine Dreadnoughts drawn up across the roadway. At their front was Brother Damos of the Angel's Porphyr, critically wounded during the scouring of Ume and entombed for the last 3,000 years. He had faced 100 of such situations before, and prevailed. The Dreadnoughts standing with Damos were armed for long-range combat with a mixture of las cannons, autocannons, and missile launchers. Their first salvo was devastating. The front line of Orc Dreadnoughts melted under their barrage, but were battered aside as the rest moved forward. The Space Marine Dreadnoughts had better weapons, and each step the Orcs made towards the Space Marines cost them dearly, but eventually they were in range and could finally reply. An advance of 400 meters had cost the Orcs 17 Dreadnoughts. Firing as they moved, they still advanced forward, and howled in fury when they saw the Space Marine Dreadnoughts step back to allow the security gate to be lowered, blocking the road once again. The Orc machines hurled themselves against the gate, tearing it down with their claws, determined to not let their foes escape. Flight was not the plan, however. On the other side of the gate, the Space Marine Dreadnoughts were ready. There were another 9 Dreadnoughts led by Brother Waylands of the Omega Marines, all armed with power claws and a mixture of short-range assault cannons, multi-meltas, and heavy bolters. Behind them stood Brother Deimos Dreadnoughts on a rampart of earth and sundered concrete, so they could see over the front line. Both ranks opened fire together, and for 7 long minutes they stood 30 meters from the Orcs, firing non-stop into the tightly packed mass of machines. Then the front rank ceased fire, weapons white hot, and charged directly into close combat. The Orcs were massed together in the roadway, and sustained fire had denied them any chance to advance, and the ones at the back had blocked the only way to retreat. The Orc force was at this point stuck in a battle they could not hope to win. The Dreadnoughts cut into them, Brother Wayland leading the way, climbing over the destroyed Orc war machines until he reached the ones still operational. He crushed them with stamps and punches, and whenever a power weapon reared up from the Killacans, a swift multi-melta shot destroyed it with its user. The attack by Judrog's Dreadnoughts had been bold, but they were unsupported and caught in complete disadvantage. advantage. But even in these conditions, not one machine even tried to flee the battle. The final reserve of his Kilakans destroyed, Judrog ended up withdrawing from the battle. Rearmed Thunderhawks had started hammering the Orc lines again, and ammunition for the Orcs was becoming scarce. But while they had won, there was no celebration in the Space Marine lines. Of the 17 ancient dreadnoughts committed to battle, 7 had been utterly destroyed, with the loss of over 9,000 years of battle experience and loyal service. The battle at Gate 9 remains their testament. Finally, in a tempest of flame, the season of fire broke upon Armageddon. Temperatures outside of the hives soared until the greenskins were forced inside the hive cities. Lava boiled across the landscapes in little rivers that broke battle lines and forced troops on both sides to abandon their positions. An uneasy stalemate was reached, and all forces upon Armageddon withdrew to lick their wounds. After that, chronologically, we have the events of the small sequel to Hellsreach known as Blood and Fire, where the Black Templars fight side by side with the Celestial Lions as they were almost annihilated by the Orcs and the external intervention of an hidden enemy. But we covered those events in our lore video Space Marines vs the Inquisition, so if you want to learn about the Battle of the Man-Named Gap, just check out that video to learn the full story in detail. Just know that chronologically it happens now in the timeline. Ghazghkull at that point will become disillusioned and bored by the stalemate, running out of patience for the lack of progress, as in his opinion they should have won by now. It is at that point that Ghazghkull will search for a blessing of his gods elsewhere. He decided to abandon the planet and take the fight somewhere else, somewhere where his gods will grant him the great fight that he so wished for.
Ghazghkull didn't give up though, thank God. Cause decent wasn't good enough for him. What he'd managed on Uruk, and what he'd nearly managed here, had been special. It'd been something new, which ain't something you can say of many Orc wars. And even if he'd mislaid his faith, he couldn't give up on the whole thing. In the brew huts, they called it a blood axe goodbye. It's when you tell your mob you'll get around in after you've been to the drops, but then you leave without paying and never come back. That's what Ghazghkull did. He made a big speech announcing that they nearly conquered the planet and ordered a big fucking assault on Tartarus, which he said was the last human had seen in the world. It was all a load of rubbish, of course, and he'd chosen Tartarus by dropping a knife into his throne room map. But as far as any Orc knew, he was still speaking the will of the gods, so they charged off happily to their deaths. Then, quietly, he gathered up the clan bosses as well as Grotsnik. I was miserable to learn, and we all sodded off in a spaceship while Yarrick and the Bakers were distracted at Tartarus.
Yarrick, hearing that Ghazghkull had left the planet and the fighting, after the events of Blood and Fire involving the Black Templars and the Celestial Lions, would depart Armageddon in chase, together with High Marshal Elbrecht and Recluser Grimaldus, to find and kill Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka once and for all. Their story will continue elsewhere, as we remain on Armageddon. We now move to the year 999 and 41, a year after the start of the invasion. The Relictors chapter will deploy pretty much all the forces they have brought to Armageddon in the Equatorial Jungle, fighting the Feral Orcs there, and openly contravening to the orders of Chapter Master Dante of the Blood Angels, which was leading the Astartes forces on the planet. The Relictors had their own objectives in mind. The chapter was by this point of the radical outlook, like the Inquisition. They used chaos against chaos, and on Armageddon after the First War, there was still heavy presence of chaos artifacts to recover, namely the shards of Angron's axe that was shattered in the First War.
This is technically contravening the lore, as in the Emperor's gift it is a sword that got shattered, and yet the Relictors are looking for the shards of an axe.
But they had also located something else in the Equatorial Jungle. Using a plan to lure the Orcs into a fight and away from a specific point where they were gathering, and after battling against the Orcs and their weird boys that had stayed behind, they found what would be known as Angron's monolith. A monolith blessed by chaos and that was still emitting chaos energies that were corrupting the jungle it had around. It is from there that they would recover one of the two shards they had come to take. But this is not the important event that would unfold in the Equatorial Jungle. In fact, a new enemy was arriving, directly from the First War for Armageddon. And don't think that I mean that they had fought here and they were coming to fight again. I mean directly from the First War for Armageddon. Let's go back to it so that I can explain better. During the First War for Armageddon, not all of the forces under Angron were happy of the time out in the Equatorial Jungle to build the monuments to the Blood God to reinforce the warp influence on the planet. Some of the Khorne berserkers stuck in the wilderness yearned for battle. They wanted blood for the Blood God and skulls for the Skull Throne. The leader of this group of warriors was a violent berserker known only as Hrothgar Furor.
Hrothgar Furor, Ravager of Worlds, Champion of Khorne, threw back his head and bellowed his fury to the burning sky. The howl reverberated across the clearing over the heads of the warriors of his seething warband. The planet had been theirs for their taking, a new prize for the demon primarch yet served in the name of Khorne.
The awesome demon entity the Imperial Dogs had so disrespectfully called the Fallen One. A new demon world. And now it had all gone to hell. It was not the hell the Führer had imagined or that his Dark Lord had longed for. Or now even the unconquerable Primarch was gone. His demon blood slaking the inestimable thirst of the warrior god of chaos. How could it have gone so wrong? How could they have failed?
The warriors of Furor decried their deprivation of battle and slaughter, stuck in the jungles as the Chaos Monuments were built, without anything to fight and kill. The warriors, in prayer to their dark god, would beg for battle and war once again, sacrificing each other as they fought and killed one another in ritualistic single combat. Khorne would heed their screams for war, and a portal started opening on the monument to the blood god they occupied. A portal 500 years into the future. A portal to the third war for Armageddon. Returning to the present, we have to talk of the Solemnus Crusade of 999 and 41. The Solemnus Crusade was a crusade declared by the Black Templars, a crusade of vengeance against Orc warboss Morkul Grimskar, for destroying the Templars' chapter keep on the world of Solemnus. That crusade would lead the Templars to Armageddon under the orders of Dreadnought Jaruld, but while they fought and destroyed the encampment of Grimskar, the Orc managed to elude them and escape. As the survivors, now under the orders of Chaplain Wolfram, reached the Equatorial Jungle to look for the Orc, they will link up with a Relictor's force under Commander Oberon Urus. The two will unite their strength, hunting for the Orcs of the jungle. The Black Templars to find Grimskar and kill him. Instead, the Relictors had other plans in motion. At the end, they would reach the same monument to the Blood God Furor had prayed to Khorne in the First War. It was surrounded by Orcs seemingly entranced by the remnants of the Chaos Monument. And at their center was a moderately powerful Orc Weird Boy. It is then that the portal opened on their side too, Furor and his forces emerging from it and engaging the Orcs. As the Templars and the Relictors engaged them in return, a three-sided battle had just started. In the end, Furor would be killed. The portal closed by the dying Weird Boy of the Orcs, that overcharging of warp energies exploded like a warp bomb, shattering the connection to the warp of the portal and closing it for good. In the end, the Relictors and the Black Templars will be victorious, but it is then that the inevitable happened. Only 6 Relictors were still alive of the original 12. Instead of the Black Templars that had set out for the mission, 13 in total, only 5 remain now. But Chaplain Wolfram had seen Oberon Urus use a demon weapon taken from a fallen Khorne berserker he had slain, used to kill Furor when his weapon was taken away from him during the fight. The problem was that now Oberon refused to relinquish the weapon and prostrate himself to be cleansed. Wolfram had witnessed the radical nature of the Relictors, and as they refused to renounce their methods and ask for purification, this could only end one way.
I command you, in the Emperor's name, drop the sword!
Wolfram declared, his voice carrying across the stone circle and rebounding from the steeled monoliths.
I cannot do that, Templar,
Urus growled.
It is my sworn duty to recover just such treasure that they might be studied, so that we might understand the machinations of the great enemy all the better. Just as it is my sworn duty, in the name of the Emperor, the Primarch and Lord Sigismund, as a chaplain and Black Templar, to bring about the end of all those who will deal with demons and thereby threaten the stability of his galaxy-spanning realms. I forbid you to take that weapon from this place of Purgatus. Then I have nothing more to say to you, Templar,
Urus declared, unrepentant.
But I have something to say to you.
The embittered chaplain stated solemnly.
And it is not something I do lightly, and without great sadness eating at my soul. But it is the only resolution to this matter that can be of the best for the Imperium.
The Black Templar's chaplain swung his Croesus Arcanum up to his shoulder in one hand, ready to bring the power axe to bear in battle once more. In his other hand he grasped his Rosarius. The ruby quartz eyes of his death's head mask bore into the Relictor captain, laying Urus's warp-stained soul bare.
The Emperor has looked upon you, and found you wanting in his sight,
Wolfram declaimed.
And his wrath is terrible. By the grace of the Holy Emperor and in his name I cast you out. It is written that by his action may you know the heretic, so I know you, Oberon Urus. I declare you hereticus. May the Master of Mankind have mercy on your eternal soul.
The last fitful lightning burst of the dying storm shook the oppressive air festering above the chaos circle. Its last gaping breaths tugging at the Templars' ruined robes, as Chaplain Wolfram of the Solemnus Crusade led the Black Templars against Chaplain Oberon Urus of the Relictors chapter and his brethren.
Brother Templars!
Wolfram declared, his voice having the quality of a tolling death knell.
In the name of the Emperor, in the name of Dorn, in the name of Sigismund, in the memory of our fallen brothers, suffer not the unclean to live. No pity, no remorse.
His loyal crusaders responded, taking up the chant.
No fear.
Unfortunately, we don't know the result of this battle, so who won is currently unknown. And finally, we come to the final event taking place before the turning of the millennium. The events of the novel of Armageddon Saint, the fourth novel in the Last Chancer series, once again written by Ghazghkull.
Is this novel any good?
Same problem of the last one. It is not bad, but the writing style is tedious. And even in this book, Gav gives me a waifu, in Ash Waster fighter Orskia, only to have her die later when she ended up fighting in melee range with a Khorne Berserker during an attack on a landing strip. She will be punched in the face by the Khorne Berserker. The punch will break her neck. I despise Ghazghkull more and more for every waifu he takes away from me.
It seems everyone you like ends up dying. I wonder why I'm still around.
Maybe because I don't like you at all, Pio. Anyway, the book's premise is pretty simple, so let's go over it real quick. It has been less than a year from the events in which Cage killed Von Straub. So by the timeline, we are probably at the end of 999 and 41. Cage miraculously survived his fall into the lava. And not only did survive and became almost a prophet in the Underhive known as the Burned Man, but he was also purged from the demon that was taking control of him. Colonel Schaefer will find him in the Underhive on a mission to kill the Burned Man, considering him a threat to Imperial stability like Von Straub was. Recognizing Cage, and after a good deal of convincing, the Colonel realized they were both on the same side. It is then that a giant orc attack arrived in the Underhive, and Cage, the Colonel, and the rest of the people living there started to flee from the Green Horde that was coming underground. They soon realized that the orcs weren't attacking, they were fleeing. A demon invasion had started at Acheron for the loss of life and the bloodshed of the war. The demons of Khorne were chasing the orcs to fight and kill them. After a furious escape from the city where a good number of followers of both Cage and the Colonel died, they would end up escaping the city. But they noticed two disconcerting things. There was a wound in reality opening over Acheron Hive, and it was expanding. And as they learned when they tried to reach the Imperial cordon besieging the Hive outside, the Imperial forces had left their defensive position and escaped the region. It is there that they will be found by the forces of the Ash Wasters, from which they learn info on what was happening, and with which they struck a temporary alliance to save the lives of all the people left near Hive Acheron. Also, this is where we meet Orskia for the first time, my giantess green-eyed warrior. Damn you, Ghazghkull! Anyway, after engaging with the forces of the demons of Nargol, the group will decide to reach for the battle fortress of the Sisters of the Order of the Argent Shroud, not far into the region from their position. It was a desperate escape, and they will battle demons of Khorne and Nargol constantly. In the end, reaching the keep, they were saved and apprehended by the Sisters. But the battle followed them, and many Sisters will perish killed by the assault of demons on their keep. And then a drop pod attack from World Eater's forces directly on the fortress. They will be saved only by the intervention of the Salamanders that had intercepted the World Eater's drop pods and had moved to fight the Berserkers immediately. There we learn that chaos rites are going on all around the planet, trying to invoke back Angron and the forces of the Blood God. The Sisters will join in a mission with other Space Marine forces to stop them. But Cage, left behind with what was left of the Colonel forces and the Ash Wasters, would have an idea. They could use an Orc Weird Boy, throwing it into the portal to the warp that was opening in the skies. There it would be overcharged of warp energies and turn into a green warp nuke, closing the portal. The Colonel considered this pretty much the mission formulated by a madman, but they were the last chancers. They had to try. They managed, with no meager losses, to kidnap an especially powerful Orc Weird Boy from an Orc Rock, and attacked an airstrip to steal a void-faring vessel to complete the mission. There they will be battered and delayed by more Khorne Berserkers that were attacking the same airstrip, fighting against Orc and Imperial forces. But in the end, once again with the intervention of the Salamanders, they reached the Void Vessel and embarked with their Orc Psychic Nuke. They knew it was a one-way voyage. Reaching the wound in reality opening over the world, they will start to be beset by the horrors of the warp, fighting for their lives as the Weird Boy freed himself and joined the fighting too. In the end, they were able to release him into the warp portal, resigning themselves to their deaths as they drifted into the warp. Unfortunately, we do not know if their plan worked. They will re-emerge in reality 50 years later, only Cage and the Colonel still alive, and will be found by the Salamanders in orbit. That, to be honest, didn't offer great clarification to what happened after they delivered the Orc into the portal. We don't even know if it was the mad plan of Cage that saved the day or the military efforts of the Salamanders in stopping the rituals on the planet. And finally, we reach the final part of this video covering the ball of dirt constantly covered in corpses that is Armageddon. You thought the war ended after Ghazghkull departed? Well no, it never ended. Not even when Cadia fell, and when the Cicatrix Maledictum opened to split the galaxy in half. That led even more enemies to Armageddon.
At this point, nuke it. The place is constantly invaded and at war, fuck it, blow it to pieces. It's easier than defending it.
The Hellstorm unleashed by the Great Rift failed to hold the fighting on Armageddon, but it did change its nature. During the Noctis Aeterna, or the Great Blackness as it is more colloquially known, which is the period after the opening of the Cicatrix Maledictum in which the Astronomicon was extinguished, reinforcements were cut off for both sides, and those that were already traveling into the system were swept into oblivion. The Orcs and Imperial forces left on Armageddon were forced to confront a new enemy. Now they not only had to fight each others, but also had to fight against endless waves of demons. At times the defenders were so desperate that Orc and Human fought alongside each other against the greater enemy. But these alliances didn't last long. The first greater battle that would be fought in the darkness of the demon invasion of Armageddon was the Battle of Hive Toraddis. After the Cicatrix Maledictum had formed, a giant warp rift opened over the planet. A warp rift that would become known as Red Angel's Gate. At Hive Toraddis, mortal legions of crazed cultists and malformed mutants emerged from Red Angel's Gate, and formed a rugged vanguard to advance on Toraddis. Across the open wastes they came, hundreds of them fall into the toxic ash before they reached the Hive's city's defenses. Behind this followed Chaos Space Marines in great number, as well as battle tanks and demon engines. But these foes were only the beginning, as even the giant figures of traitor titans would be seen appearing ready to give battle. Toraddis was a small hive, and the relative lack of orc attacks that accompanied its way in the conflicts had left his garrison completely inadequate. Their soldiers pulled out to reinforce other hive cities. Toraddis was about to be stormed, and they had no time to wait for reinforcements. The officer in command of Toraddis, Colonel Berkant, was a veteran of the Orc Wars, and he decided to command the 473rd Armageddon Steel Legion with all his might in the defense of the Hive. Berkant kept the majority of his transports hidden around Toraddis' southern gates, and prepared a defense of heavy ordnance to greet the traitors once they arrived, requisitioning weapons from Toraddis' arms factories to give them to the soldiers and defenders. As the army of heretics entered in range, artillery shells started raining on them, killing them in scores. But the survivors seemed to almost not care, still advancing against the city. But their assault was a feint. The Chaos Space Marines were moving to the eastern flank, while the Titans were moving to the western flank. Some of them already firing heavy long-range ordnance against the walls of the Hive City. Colonel Berkant kept up the bombardment on cultists until they had reached the outer defenses, whereupon many hundreds of lasguns opened fire against them from armored battlements. The walls were built to withstand the turbulent storms of the Ash Wastes, but Toraddis' outer walls fell swiftly as Berkant had predicted. Barrages of Meltafire and Plasma Bolts turned the northern gates to slag. The Chaos Marines had advanced swiftly from the east, and they smashed violently through the remnants of the now destroyed gates. Being met by 200 Imperial Guardsmen that formed makeshift lines and rained fire on the invaders. They managed to bring down a handful of Marines, but the rest were butchered with chain axes by the coming invaders. Having cleared the outer area of the Hive, the Chaos Marines pushed on through the Hive City. But Berkant's artillery officers adjusted their weapons and opened fire against Chaos Marines, starting to bomb them in the streets of their own city. The fighting continued as minutes stretched into hours, hours into days. The colonel knew that Chaos would triumph on the city, and tried to slow it by sacrificing portions of his ever-diminishing forces. Every time he used his heaviest weapons, retreating them more and more to new and higher positions so that they could keep firing. Meanwhile, the traitor titans barged through the lowest regions of the city, crushing the remains of the northern gate. On the third day, Berkant unleashed his transport reserves, a last gamble he made, hoping that they would support a counterattack from another Hive city. The Chimeras drove through the ruined northern gates, their firepower useless against the Titans, but they managed to cut down several Chaos Space Marines, and the sudden new threat slowed even further the traitor advance. After another half day, when Berkant was sure he had killed as many traitors as he could manage, he had his engines here trigger the Hive's energy core to collapse, bringing the entire building down upon the heretics, crushing at least one Titan, together with numerous heretic Astartes, even as reinforcements finally raced in to avenge Hive Toraddis and its selfless regiment. Berkant's sacrifice was not in vain. They had stalled the enemy long enough for reinforcements to arrive, and make the traitors pay in blood for what they did to the Hive. But this was only the beginning. The season of blood had just started, and many more would die before it was over. The death and destruction caused during the siege of Thoradis ended up feeding the Red Angel's Gate even more, making it grow bigger. The pulsating sword of hatred and fury in the sky kept sending waves of corrupt forces to Armageddon through the warp. Distant from Armageddon, Angron's former flagship, the Conqueror, answers the call. Its engines flare into life, the vessel plunges into the warp without warning, dragging along ships of World Eater warbands and other renegades. On Titan, the already heavily stretched Grey Knight forces foresee the great danger manifesting on Armageddon. But it is not all they see. Something is tearing through the Sea of Souls, leaving behind the ripplings like an aquatic super predator. They recognize the energies of the entity at once. Angron is coming to Armageddon once again. The prognosticar of the Grey Knights turn to their pool of recondite arcana. Enacting diabolic rituals and incantations inscribed upon wooden relics known as the Lucid Stele, they project the spirit of one of their number into the warp and make direct contact with Grandmaster Rotwir Morvan of the Fifth Brotherhood. The prognosticars advise him to divert course from the Nakmund Gauntlet and instead lead the Fifth Brotherhood to Armageddon. The prognosticars also dispatch astropathic warnings to others, like High Marshal Elbrecht and Niall Stonecaller. All these undertakings cost the lives of 3 prognosticars, whose mind and souls are burned out by their efforts to sustain the ritual. Of the elusive stele, nothing remains but wisps of foul-smelling smoke. Within the Hives of Armageddon, a new wave of cult activity rises. Many of the inhabitants of the Underhive dedicate themselves to Khorne, and start slaughtering one another. Loyalist citizens are purged as the zealous agents of the Adeptus Ministorum seek to root out the rebels, but their efforts did little to stop the spreading madness. As the Hives erupt in internal battle, corruption spreads from the Red Angel's Gate, lapping at the northern reaches of Armageddon Secundus. Near the ruins of Hive Thoradis, no fewer than 4 regiments of Armageddon Steel Legion turn their weapons upon their former allies. More cultists emerge from the ruins of the Hive to join the assault. The few heretics captured in the fighting at Thoradis speak of a prophet of the Blood God, a leader who calls himself Ascarra the Ensanguined. Logan Grimnar Space Wolves and High Marshal Elbrecht Black Templars arrive at Armageddon to find the planet riven by war. The Space Wolves land in the vicinity of Hive volcanoes in Armageddon Prime. They engage directly with the masses of mutant abominations from the Hive's lower levels. The intervention of Grimnar forces buys time for the officials of Volcanoes to restore order among his defense regiments. Helbrecht instead dispatched his battle brothers directly to Armageddon Secundus. The Hive Marshal joins the Imperial forces near Hive Infernus, and makes a concentrated effort to push back the heretic armies besieging the Hive. His ultimate objective is to recapture the ruins of Hades and Thoradis, and purge them of their rebel occupiers. They will be joined by the Death Corps of Krieg 74th Line Corps. Grandmaster Morvan's Fifth Brotherhood arrives in orbit of Armageddon and finds a desperate situation just below them. He and his battle brothers swiftly identify concentrations of warp energy scattered across the fire wastes and dispatch Interceptor Squad to investigate with impunity. The rest of the Grey Knights is held in reserve as Morvans considers his next move. It is at that point that the Conqueror and his fleet of Khorne Berserker and Madmen emerges from the warp in the Armageddon system. They would have to face in orbit the remains of the Navis Imperialis, bolstered by the flagship of the Black Templars, the Eternal Crusader, and the flagship of the Space Wolves, the All-Father's Honor. But the World Eaters and their allies had little interest in engaging in protracted void combat. Instead, the Chaos Fleet reaches low orbit. Expendable Khornate warships are hurled towards the Imperial fleet to buy time, so that the entire fleet could drop pod down its cargo of warriors. Angron's presence is at this point rumored on Armageddon.
Angron, presence rumored. Eyewitnesses contained for purification. Recording 4412. Fire wastes. Empiric impulse signature detected.
But the rumors will not take long to be confirmed for good.
The skies above were aflame. Angular dropships screamed through ashen clouds, leaving dark contrails in their wake. Drop pods fell like fragments of shattered asteroid, the fires of atmospheric entry leaking from their plated hulls. Some were plucked from the sky by streaking missiles. Most plunged through hails of flak to slam into Armageddon's toxic earth. Ascarra, bludgeoned, skewered and butchered their way forward. She felt the ground beneath her feet tremble. A shiver ran through her spine, and her skin tingled. Across the front line, amid the slaughter, the fabric of reality began to slow away. Kicking another soldier aside, she brought her chainsword down on top of his head. Shards of bone and wet brain matter splattered across her body. Above Ascarra, unreality welled like blood from a laceration. The silver cut swiftly expanded into a ragged wound, through which a colossal winged figure tore, sweeping down before the charging cultists. A torrential afterbirth of blood and viscera fell with it, flooding trenches and sweeping stunned soldiers to their deaths.
The demonic figure flexed his wings and gazed down upon the cowering combatants below. Cable implants split from his skull, writhing like a nest of metallic snakes. He raised its colossal blades and let out a roar of pain and fury that set Ascara's soul ablaze. Then he thundered towards on iron hooves, trampling cultists and loyalist soldiers, before soaring into the burning sky. Tracers illuminated his diabolic form, and fleck fire splashed harmlessly from his brass armor. The red monster roared, a primal bellow of apoplectic rage that sent waves of fear through trembling bodies. Ascara felt her muscles flex and swell. A red mist felt across her vision as she hacked through stunned opponents. The Red Angel had heard the call. The season of blood had dawned.
With the remainder of the World Eater's fleet now positioned in low orbit above Armageddon, the invasion had truly begun. Drop pods, landers, and landing crafts of varying sizes and patterns drove through the skies, accompanied by packs of winged demon engines that attacked Imperial fighters in the sky. For every vessel shot down, dozens made landfall and deployed their warriors to the ground. The majority of the enemy forces landed in the northern reaches of Armageddon Secundus. There they fortified the ruins of Hive Hades and Toradis, erecting monuments to the Blood God, extending even more demonic energies across the continent and the entire planet. In Armageddon Prime, Logan Grimnar and the Space Wolves had taken command of the disorganized Imperial forces, pushed into chaos by treachery and internal conflict, and set about putting down the active rebellions festering inside Hive Volcanoes, and organizing defensive troops deployments in and around Volcanoes Mountains. Meanwhile, in Armageddon Secundus, High Marshal Helbrecht and the Black Templars had established their base of operation in Hive Infernos, the current seat of Armageddon's government and metropolis in the grip of civil war. From this hive, they were also engaged in battle to south and east, seeking to recover and purge the ruins of Hades and Toradis. The push of the Astra Militarum forces towards Hades Hive had ground to a stalemate around the Omendis Bridge. Here, the forces of the Imperial Guard found themselves surrounded, with Khorne berserkers to the rear and heretic forces entrenched in front of them. They were swiftly hacked to pieces. Only the intervention of the Black Templars Crusader squads, aided by the firepower of Dreadnought Brother Guntal, prevented a complete rout. This battle saw thousands killed, and the Loyalists driven back to the safety of Hive Infernos. But it would be in the vicinity of the ruined Hive Toradis that the first big engagement of the war would unfold. Castellan Holzer of the Black Templars would lead the Imperial push towards the ruins of Hive Toradis with the assistance of Colonel Kors, commander of the Krieg 74th Line Corps. Initially, they were met with great success. Under suggestion of Colonel Kors, the Black Templars would relent from an aggressive charge into the enemy in favor of establishing a series of defensive positions to quell any counterattacks. Construction began with Imperator Line Alphus, a line of bunkers, gun nests and artillery emplacement stretching miles across the Ash Wastes to the southwest of Hive Toradis. As the soldiers of the Death Corps completed their construction, Holzer's Black Templars led repeated forays into the heretic lines. The offensive pressed the heretics back towards Toradis' shattered mass. Corps would utilize repeated artillery bombardments and swift trench raids to goad the enemy into ill-advised assaults. These assaults would be beaten back and decimated by the overlapping fire of heavy weapon teams and concentrated attacks undertaken by Black Templars, supported by heavy armor. This would lead to the Imperials regaining more and more territory. Eventually, however, the progress slowed. As the attackers reached Hive Toradis ruins, they inevitably ran into heavier defenses, and the more disciplined heretic soldiers stationed in the southern and western fringes of the Broken Hive proved far less susceptible to coarse baiting tactics. The descent of the World Eaters and their masses of cultists removed any hope of the Loyalists capturing their objective. Bolstered by teeming hordes of jackals and packs of berserkers, the heretics pushed back the combined Imperial army with repeated attacks. With each violent death inflicted, the swell of empiric energy battering the fabric of reality increased in intensity. The barriers of real space at one point could not contain it anymore, and the warp bursted into real space, unleashing a legion of demonic fury against Armageddon. It was by this route that Angron appeared on the surface of Armageddon once more. The Imperial forces near Toradis were caught completely unprepared by the Red Angel's manifestation. He plummeted from blood-red skies and swept through the Death Corps infantry unchecked. Tides of demons followed in his wake. At Imperator Line Primus, the strongest defensive position, canine monstrosities bound into Loyalist trench lines, ripping and tearing until their spiked bodies and jaws were coated in viscera. Bloodletters loped forward to hack off the heads of stunned soldiers and take them as trophies. In the hours following Angron's manifestation, Holzer and Kor's armies were driven back across the ground they had spent days conquering with flesh and blood. The bodies of the Astra Militarum soldiers and heretics littered each abandoned trench lines and blasted expanse of no man's land. Everywhere Angron struck, the line bowed again, threatening to collapse collapse entirely and cleared the way for the heretics to assault Hive Acheron. The survivors rallied at Imperator Line Viron, repelling a concentrated assault of Khorne berserkers together with the tides of mutant cultists. At this point, Holzer and Kors were all that remained of the combined army's senior combat structure, and the fighting strength of the units under their command had been halved. Angrily, Holzer signaled a general retreat to Imperator Line Alphus. As the last Krieg soldiers fled their positions and heretics scrambled over ramparts and barricades, Kors called down artillery strikes and orbital bombardments on vacated positions, trying to buy time as the defenders retreated to the last line of defense. At Hive Volcanoes instead, the army from weeks was in a disorganized redeployment, not prepared to the sudden appearance and landing of the World Eater's forces, leaving the side of the Equatorial Jungle and Volcanoes Mountains weak to assault. Coordinate assailants capitalized upon loyalist disorder and lack of firepower, utilizing armored transports to overrun and destroy struggling units before they could reach their assigned lines. Whilst the smattering of heavy weapons positioned at the front line accounted for some of the heretic transports, dozens smashed through tank traps and minefields to disgorge their cargo of warriors. Emboldened by combat steams and sheer unbridled fury, the traitors recklessly threw themselves on their enemy. The Meridian line of defense held for several days, managing to push back wave after wave of cultists and traitors. Resistance came to an end when the Orientum line crumbled beneath the constant assaults of the servants of Khorne. This allowed the assailants to push south, striking the Meridian line from the flank and rear. The loyalists were forced in a nastily retreat, having to punch through the encirclement that was forming. Relief, unexpectedly, arrived from the jungle itself. The World Eater's arrival and the orbital battles that had accompanied them had been noticed by the feral orcs in the jungle, that decided to join the fighting. Entire tribes emerged from the jungle over the next days to join the battle, and it was so pressing that he managed to draw the traitors away from the Vulcanine wall, occupying them for long enough to permit a retreat from the crumbling defensive lines. As the news of the onslaught at Hive Volcanoes reached Grimnar, he dispatched what reinforcements he could spare to bolster the defenses of its walls. Sweeping over the Volcanoes mountains, a trio of Space Wolves dropships plummeted to land amidst the Imperial defenses, and deployed Bloodclaws and Grey Hunter squads. The Space Marines would launch several successful counterattacks that drove the enemy east. These, at least for the time being, managed to stabilize the situation in the mountains. Inside Hive Volcanoes instead, the Great Wall's scout packs continued to hunt and destroy Cornet cults hidden in the Underhive. To the north, the World Eaters, having landed in large numbers, started marching towards Hive Volcanoes. Demonic hordes came forth at their side, the bloodthirster Ghazghkull leading tides of bloodletters and bloodcrashers in repeated assaults on the outer defenses. The demon attack was only halted when Logan Grimnar and his Wolf Guard launched an assault against the Horde, that cut directly into the enemy forces to engage Ghazghkull directly. The fighting was brutal, Thunderwolf cavalry crashing headlong into their Bloodcrashers counterparts. Grimnar himself would join the fighting, engaging in a bloody duel with Ghazghkull that ended with the axe Morkai buried in the demon's skull. With the death of the Bloodthirster, Volcano's northern perimeter was secured. With Angron striking at Toradis, more and more of the defenders of Hive Hades were drawn to the rampage of the Red Angel. It is this that High Marshal Helbrecht will take advantage of, leading his Sword Brethren in a second assault on the Omendis Bridge, intending to exploit resultant gaps in the foe's line. This time, they were aided by a pair of titans from Legio Crucius. The Warlord Titans Cataphractis Pugnus and Ire Ferrum supported the Knights in their attack, leveling the heretic positions with missile volleys and obliterating cultists with Gatling blasters. Beneath the lumbering titans, the Chimera transports of the Armageddon Steel Legion crossed the bridge, deploying chem-massed soldiers to seize ground. Helbrecht and his Black Templars reinforced wherever the line was faltering, fighting with Flame and Bolter against the servants of the Blood God that were trying to stop the assault. They would end up conquering the bridge after several hours of bitter fighting. However, the Loyalist advance towards Hive Hades would soon be stopped. A legion of demons started spilling out from the shattered reality near Hive Toradis, emerging from the skies and plummeting into the Imperial lines. At the same time, heavy landers of the World Eaters plunged through the heavens to land across the crater that was once Hive Hades, releasing on the battlefield a trio of Chaos Titans. The monstrous war engines moved forward, starting to hammer at their Loyalist counterpart with their weapons. The fighting between the Titans would become extremely violent. Meanwhile, the Black Templars charged forward in between them, engaging demonic foot soldiers that were attacking in support of the Chaos Titans. The High Marshal's blade took the heads from dozens of demons, but the brunt of the damage was brought to the soldiers of the Astra Militarum, that were decimated by the Titans' fire. Amid this bloodshed, Styrbjorn, Flint Eye, and his Space Wolves battle brothers announced their arrival, their storm walls hovering atop one of the traitor Titans. Cutting their way inside the shell of the Titan, Titan, the Space Wolves fought their way through its crew and bands of berserkers to plant melta charges on the monster's tainted reactor, before fighting their way out of the doomed Titan. The Titan exploded in a ball of fire and energies, consuming mortal cultists in atomic fire and casting demonic entities back into the warp. But the victory was short-lived. The losses suffered by Helbrecht's armies were significant enough to halt their advance to Hades' Hive. Instead, the battered survivors withdrew towards the safety of Hive Infernus to regroup, rearm, and plan their next offensive.
But wait, if Helbrecht is here, is Grimaldus here too?
Giulio!
The hero of Ellswitch. Amongst the Black Templars who returned to Armageddon, at Helbrecht's side was Marek Grimaldus, High Chaplain of the Black Templars.
My rank is Reclusiarch. Use it.
With Helbrecht's approval, Chaplain Grimaldus returned to Ellswitch, the site of his infamous defense of the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant. When the World Eaters descended upon Armageddon, he led the successful defense of the Hive, his mere presence inspiring its populace to fight with incredible resolve. Some state that the Ellswitch reverence for the Reclusiarch prevented heresy from taking root within the Hive's walls, starkly contrasting the Armageddon's other Hives.
While all of this was happening, the Grey Knights were deploying planet-wide in different missions to destroy Angron's monoliths and monuments to the Blood God to slow the corruption, while some of the Brothers of the Fifth Brotherhood, under direct orders of Tauros Andron, fought their way into the Diabolus Forge complex, recovering from it after fighting to its core a number of Vortex missiles for the next stage of operations. Their efforts served to slow down the corruption of the Blood God on the planet. When Helbrecht and his forces reached Hive Infernus for safety, they found it in profound chaos. Half of the Imperial Guard forces they had left in the Hive to defend it had turned traitor, and now the Hive was embattled in various sectors, with symbols of the Chaos Gods drawn and sculpted everywhere.
To Helbrecht, whose ire had already been raised by defeat, such blasphemy against the God Emperor was unforgivable. In his eyes, the embattled district's population were beyond salvation. Rallying his crusaders, he began a brutal purge of Infernus' outer districts. No distinction was made between friend and foe. Those districts that had fallen to the heretics and rebels were scoured of life.
It is at this point that the Grey Knights called for a Grand Council with the other Imperial commanders on the world, proclaiming one bleak truth. If the Red Angel's Gate could not be sealed, then the war could not be turned in their favor. The Grey Knights needed the help of all the commanders and their forces on the ground to achieve this purpose. The Grand Master of the Fifth Brotherhood requested that the Loyalist forces on the ground kept Angron busy and distracted, and, if possible, they will need to help banish him for good. The plan was for Grimnar and High Marshal Helbrecht to lead their forces in the Diabolus Forge complex to bolster its defenses. It was the perfect site to stage an effective defense. They would buy time for a second force to strike north, across the boiling sea, and begin an offensive towards the Red Angel's Gate, led by a number of Loyalist commanders on the ground, including Castellan Holzer and Colonel Kors. Though doubts on the borderline reason-shattering plans were raised, the armies of the Imperium moved to put the plan into motion. All forces summoned to the Diabolus Forge complex would assemble and start making preparations to meet Angron and his forces in battle. The Imperator line started retreating to lure the enemies in, sacrificing almost half of its own soldiers to keep luring the Chaos forces into the Forge complex. The plan worked. Artillery started raining onto the Cornate hordes before they had even reached the Diabolus Forge complex, butchering the followers of the Blood God in pre-planned killing zones. But still, the mass of enemies would just climb over the bodies of their fallen, still chasing the Loyalists deeper into the mountains and the Forge complex. Angron, though, recognized the trap, and by his orders, Gormonger packs scaled the sheer mountains to the west and north, terrain the Loyalist defenders considered impassable, and struck directly at the rearmost Imperial fortifications. Even if not without losses to the mountains themselves, this forced frontline defenders to turn around to face the threat that had now appeared behind them. With the support of demon engines and winged demon princes, the artillery was soon silenced, and the forces of Angron slowly but surely started grinding their way into the Forge complex. Helbrecht and Grimnar were leading their own forces into battle up the slopes, waiting for them to enter pre-prepared kill zones before engaging, a strategy that would prove effective in slowing Angron's advance, and it is only then that Angron will join the fighting himself. Plummeting from the skies to land amidst the rubble of distant walls, he lashed out with his blades, splitting open Helbrecht's dreadnoughts and cutting down Black Templars by the dozen. As the violence increased, the Demon Primarchs seemed to swell with power. Helbrecht's Black Templars were forced back from their positions on and beneath the walls by the intensity of the onslaught. There, they were joined by Logan Grimnar and his surviving Space Wolves, and together undertook a fighting withdrawal, moving back through the ruins of the Diabolus Forge complex. This would separate Angron from his own forces, as while he was Whilst chasing the retreating Marines, his followers were still fighting the entrenched Imperial Guard forces inside the complex. He was simply too fast for his cultists to keep up with him. As the Demon Primarch found himself in the gutted remnants of a Grimeslick furnace, his burning gaze fell upon Tauros Endron and the Grey Knights. The brother captain and his bodyguard stood before him. On the floor, traced in powdered silver and bone, was a Unicursal hexagram. At each of its 6 points stood one of the conical vortex warheads recovered by Endron from the complex subterranean vaults. As Endron intoned words of banishment, the Grey Knights opened fire with storm bolters and psi weapons. The impact of these projectiles upon Endron's body stoked his anger even further. He rushed forward, hateful and dismissive of his opponent's pathetic sorcery, proving the inconsequential natures of their occult symbols by smashing his way through them. The circle would burn the flesh of Angron when he stepped full inside. As he did so, Endron reached for a detonator and pressed the trigger. The binding circle had not been drawn as Angron suspected to ensnare him. Its purpose instead had been to contain most of the fury of the detonating warheads. Within a bubble of shimmering energy, rampant empiric forces tore the Demon Primarch form asunder before collapsing with thunderous crack. As the force field collapsed, quakes rippled through the mountains. Abyssal shafts split slopes and swallowed loyalists and heretic alike. Thousands were buried beneath the collapsing mountains. Angron had been temporarily banished, but the price for this small victory had been terrible. The few loyalists fortunate enough to escape the apocalyptic destruction dragged themselves back towards the relative safety of Ivy Infernus. The outcome of this conflict now hinged upon the forces deploying in the Fire Wastes towards Red Angel's Gate. In the Fire Wastes, loyalist forces under the orders of Grandmaster Morvans will make landfall from the seas directly on the coastlines. The Grey Knights moving like a spearhead to open the way for the rest of the loyalist forces deploying on the continent. The Dead Corps of Krieg were the first to reach the coast, and after routing the remaining coastal defenders loyal to the Blood God, they pressed north. Battle after battle, the loyalist forces kept advancing towards Red Angel's Gate. The human forces in their midst suffering radiation sickness from the environment itself, or empiric hallucinations caused by the warp energies emitted from the gate. The ground itself shifted and churned, opening cusps that separated units and swallowed tanks whole. But this didn't stop the Kriegs, that inch by inch kept moving forward, with Black Templars and Space Wolves launching surgical attacks against enemy strongpoints, while the Grey Knights destroyed demonic assaults wherever they appeared. The main obstacle now were the Kayarana's ore mines, that had been heavily fortified against the orcs in the Fire Wastes. Now those same defenses were turned against the invading loyalists. The Battle of Kayaranas would be extremely brutal. Dead Corps of Krieg charging defenses as cultists slaughtered them in the hundreds. Chaos Titans had arrived from Red Angel's Gate and reinforced the walls, and only the arrival of further reinforcements from the Titans of Legio Crucius turned the conflict in loyalist favor. In the end, under the battering force of the Titans, the heretics were pushed back, and the loyalists managed to overrun the traitor positions, conquering Kayaranas. Here the loyalist forces will divide. The forces of the Black Templars and Space Wolves will be ordered to assault two Chaos Monoliths that were empowering Red Angel's Gate and keeping it open. But the true battle would be fought at a location known as Crimson Mesa.
As Holzer's and Flintice's forces set about shattering the anchoring monoliths, Grandmaster Morvans led his force to the base of the Crimson Mesa. Atop this mountainous plateau blazed the manifest heart of the Red Angel's Gate itself, a crackling tempest of warp energy that cast its malevolent pall over the fire wastes.
Grandmaster Morvans will lead the mass ranks of the Astra Militarum infantry and their engines of war towards the looming mass of the Crimson Mesa himself, fighting at the front of the assaulting force protected inside the frame of a Nemesis Dread Knight, together with brothers Gorn and Vorren, piloting their own Nemesis Dread Knights. More than 20 of the 5th Brotherhood's elite followed in their wake. The human advance of the Death Corps of Krieg instead was still bolstered by small squads of Black Templars and Space Wolves, deployed to clear any stubborn resistance in the wake of the Krieg forces. Fighting through the traitor elements hiding in the inhospitable environment, slowly and with heavy losses, they would end up finally reaching the base of the Crimson Mesa. Holzer and Flintice's forces had managed to destroy the anchoring monoliths. All that was left now was for the Grey Knights to seal the gate for good. While the human elements of the Imperial force stayed behind at the base of the Mesa, all Space Marine forces charged forward, leading the assault on the slopes to reach the gate, pressing forward under heavy fire to clear snarling cultists from bolt holes and clefts in the rock face. Many monsters and mutants tried to stop the Space Marines from advancing, but their momentum was unstoppable. The Dread Knights cut into pieces the forces emerging from the portal. In the end, they managed to reach the peak of the Mesa. The Red Angel's Gate hung above the center, pulsing like a beating heart. As Morvans, Gorn and Vorren draw back the demons with silencer fire and sweeping blows from their nemesis weapons, Librarian Torvik led 8 Grey Knights paladins closer to the gate. Each one of them bore a shard of Angron's shattered black blade in one of their gauntleted ends. As their Terminator brothers held back the waves of cultists and demons streaming across the Mesa's peaks, the paladins held the shards aloft and channeled their psychic might onto the forged metal. They chanted sorcerous incantations while tracing fire and blood hexagrams in the air. The 8 fragments of the black blade rose to float before the glowing mass of the gate. Librarian Torvik stood closest to the portal's blazing heart, raising his warding stave aloft as he uttered the syllables of a sealing spell. With the fractured blade fragments acting as an arcane focus, the Grey Knights pulled their psychic might to reverse the flow of the empiric ley lines, drawing Angron's fury out of the planet's crust and back into the heart of the Red Angel's gate. The mountains shook, tremors rippling from the ley lines and opening cusps in the earth. The gate contracted as if in pained response to the sorcery. The portal itself seemed to be shattering, spilling torrents of blood-stained ectoplasm. Morvans swung his nemesis mace into clustered packs of demons, obliterating their forms in balls of azure fire. As he smashed the fiends aside, he felt a brooding pressure forming in the recess of his skull. The gate's contraction continued, increasing in frequency. Something was coming through. Dread Knights at his side, the Grandmaster turned towards the looming threat. Even through the warp energy tearing at his armored suit's latticed walls and clawing at his consciousness, he recognized the demon spore. Angron had returned once again.
This bastard has spawned and died more times than Kenny from South Park at this point.
The return of Angron reinvigorated the assaulting Cornate forces at the base of the Mesa, and they threw themselves against the human forces left to contain them. Madness started sweeping through even the loyalist ranks as the commissars and the colonel tried to maintain order. But in the end, the lines fell, and the battle turned to a violent and brutal slaughter for both sides. Colonel Kors will perish in the battle, cut down from a storm of chain blades, dying as he screamed a Krieg prayer of atonement. The Space Wolves and Black Templars left at the summit rushed down the Mesa's slope to reach the human defenders and repel the assault, leaving the Grey Knights alone at the summit. It is here that the true battle will be finally fought. Angron emerged from the crimson haze of the Red Angel's gate in a storm of psychic energy, his form illuminated by lightning that rained down from the warp storm above him. Immediately, the Demon Primarch's gaze took in the Grey Knights, his monstrous face twisting into a snarl of rage as he caught the stench of sorcery. 8 paladins knelt in place on the southern side of the rift, their backs to the battle raging across the slopes. Each was deep in concentration, fighting to utter the nightmarish syllables of their grand spell of exorcism. Grey Knight's Terminator stood between the kneeling warriors and the reborn Demon Primarch, projecting with their psychic powers a physical barrier around the kneeling paladins that shimmered in gold. With the sound of battle echoing around the slopes of Crimson Mesa, with a wordless roar of anger, Angron charged forward, crashing into the Terminators. He engaged against the Grey Knights in a brutal battle as tides of demons followed the Primarch from the portal, moving in every direction as they emerged from the gate. Mass ranks of blood letters loped forward. Bloodcrusher's cavalry coursed out of the maelstrom to smash into the Terminators, and this only emboldened the cultists fighting around the Mesa to kill the Imperial forces left to keep them away. Grandmaster Rotwir Morvans, already engaged in fighting atop the southern slopes, noted Angron's arrival, and moved to face the Red Angel's advance, rushing to the Demon Primarch as he crushed demons under his nemesis mace. Brother Vorren and Gorn followed suit, firing their arm-mounted weapons against a pursuing unit of Khorne Berserkers, rendering them tumult and slurry. As Morvans, Vorren and Gorn rushed to meet Angron in battle, the Demon Primarch had managed to reach the shield conjured by the Brotherhood Terminators, several of them now laying dead in his wake. At that point, as Angron threatened the ritual that would close the gate for good, Morvans projected an order in the minds of Gorn and Vorren.
Disengage! Focus your fire on Angron!
Morvans projected the order by sucking impulse to Gorn and Vorren.
The casting must be completed.
In the end, Angron managed to break into the shield, killing one of the paladins performing the ritual, managing to weaken the ritual as one of the shards of the Black Blade clattered to the ground. As he moved to the next of the kneeling knights, a barrage of azure bolts struck his burnished brass plate and bored into his crimson flesh, releasing gouts of active smoke and psychoplasmic gore. The Demon Primarch snarled in rage, his malevolent glare falling upon the trio of Dread Knights. He broke into a loping run, his iron hooves throwing up red dust as he covered the ground towards the Grey Knights. He crashed into the nearest Dread Knight's shoulder first, propelling the warsuit backwards and sending it tumbling across the rocky ground before launching himself high in the air and coming down atop the prone warsuit. bringing Spinegrinder down again. The Dread Knight convulsed violently as his pilot was bifurcated in an eruption of gore and splintered metal. Another of the Dread Knights opened fire at point-blank range, engulfing Angron's body in flame. The Demon Primarch roared, charging out of the Inferno, and propelled himself at the next of the towering warsuits, launching a flurry of armor-shattering blows. Most were parried or turned aside by the Nemesis Dread Knight's warded armor. Others smashed through arcane defenses and beat into silvered plate. The suit was damaged more and more, and this left Brother Vorren limping. With a snarl, Angron brought his barbed tail sweeping around, knocking the Dread Knights from its feet and stamping down the prone warrior's harness with a clawed, brass-shod hoof. Ceramite splintered and collapsed, bone shattered, blood jetted forth. As Angron raised his weapons to land the killing blow on Vorren's downed Dread Knight, Grandmaster Morvans drew upon his psychic might and charged forwards. Nemesis Mace rimmed with azure fire. He crashed into Angron's flank in a dazzling explosion of force. The Demon Primarch reeled, throwing back his head and letting out a bellow of apoplexy. Morvans drove past Angron's bulk, parrying blow after blow and positioning himself between the Demon Primarch and his last surviving brothers. Spinegrinder, teeth now clotted with bloody remains, slammed into his Dread Knight's force fields, which flickered and strained as they deflected the blow. Morvans hit back, swinging his warsuit's fist into the monster's ribs. A satisfying crack rang out as demonic flesh and armor broke under the force of the strike. He struck again, driving Angron back towards the portal. The ritual casting had reached its peak now. Morvans could feel the gate's empiric magnetism tearing at his psyche. Angron felt its pull too. The Demon Primarch's skin began to blister and peel from his body. The burning hatred in his eyes, however, remained undimmed. Around the combatants, the Grey Knights had drawn back to surround the remaining paladins as demons, cultists, and world eaters kept hurling themselves against them. Other loyalist forces were trapped on various sides of the battlefields, unable to make any significant advance against the teeming masses of heretics. Morvans swung his mace. Angron intercepted the blow with the crook of his chain axe and twisted, bending the Dread Knight's arm back and wrenching hard with a bellow of exertion. With a scream of shearing metal, the limb was pulled off from the joint of the Dread Knight. Angron struck again. His demon sword, known as Samniarius, slammed into the Dread Knight's frame and bit deep, its burning blade driving through the harness and into Morvan's chest. He exhaled in pain as Angron wrenched at the demon blade, attempting to free it from his innards. With a final booming syllable, the paladins completed their ritual. The 8 slivers of the black blade were snatched up by the empiric vacuum of the dwindling warp rift and drawn into its mouth. Demons screeched as their physical forms were torn apart and cast back into the warp. Loyalist and heretic soldiers fighting everywhere clashed at their skulls in pain, blood streaming from their eyes as the rift tore at their very soul. With Angron's weapon still stuck in his chest, Morvans drew upon his last reserve of strength. He pressed his Dread Knight's shoulder into Angron's chest and drove the snarling demon towards the gate's imploding core. Locked in a violent embrace, the two were dragged into the abyss, the last of Morvan's lifeblood pouring from his body.
Fleeting visions of Armageddon flashed through his mind. Aquila banners raised high, battles yet to be fought, champions risen and heroes slain. As death rushed to meet him, he felt the empiric shockwave of the Red Angel's Gate collapsing into nothingness behind him. His duty was at an end. Armageddon's suffering will continue.
Armageddon had been saved from total damnation and corruption, but the battle was far from over, and the damages were even more brutal than anybody could have predicted. By the time the light of the Astronomica returned and travel through the warp became possible again, the Imperial Relief Force arrived to find the landscape of Armageddon greatly changed. Half of the planet had now mutated, and warped into what looked like a demon world, and an hellish landscape merged over the top of what had once been a war-torn Hive world. The fighting of Armageddon continues, and at least for now, there is no ending to the third and possible fourth war for Armageddon still infuriating on the surface of the planet. This, unfortunately, is all the info we have about the story of the conflicts of Armageddon at the moment. And now, let's move to the lies of Lexicanum on all the events that we have covered. First of all, the backstory of Sebastian Yarrick that we recounted briefly when we introduced his character is in fact a bit longer than you can imagine. We gave you the extremely shortened version. The backstory of Yarrick is narrated in the short story Survivor, that is included in volume 1 of The Best of Hammer and Bolter. It is a 60 pages long short story.
Short story, 60 pages. The two things don't work with each other.
It is correct that he was born as Sebastian Vardin on the planet of Taos 3, and it is also correct that he became orphaned at the age of 7. But it is not mentioning that he was the coward and weak son of 2 affluent members of the higher echelons of the planet and his own hive city, because Sebastian Yarrick wasn't born a badass. And it doesn't mention how much of a fucking asshole his own grandfather was. He paid the bullies of his own grandson to beat him up badly every time he had healed from the last beating they had given him. At one point, he paid them to stab him!
Tough but caring grandfather.
It also adds that when the orcs invaded the planet, Sebastian's grandfather was killed. That we actually don't know. Probable, but the man was recruited back into the Imperial Guard and left Sebastian. He didn't have other choices. And this part of the lore is instead completely fucking wrong. Sebastian didn't spend 3 years alone on the entire world. He spent months alone together with orc invaders in his own village after it was conquered. He was the only survivor after all, and spent all his time running around trying to not get caught, scavenging for supplies and even killing some Gretchins that got too close to one of his hiding spots. There is no forest to be talked of. It was an abandoned high village far away from the main complexes. And he never killed a real orc in the entirety of the short story. This part is completely made up. The rest is more or less accurate, but read the short story, there is a lot more to it than this. But yeah, it goes deep enough into the backstory of Yarrick for how he joined the guard and for how he lived when he was a child. Now, moving on, in the wiki of the Second War for Armageddon, the giant space hulk used as the main method of transportation of Ghazghkull in reaching Armageddon, called World Killer, is not mentioned anywhere, when it was one of the big plot points of how Ghazghkull and his new Wa left the planet they were stranded on. High Volcanoes is not mentioned anywhere in the wiki of the Second War for Armageddon, when it was the first hive to fall to Ghazghkull and we know in depth the story of how it fell and even the tactics he used to breach it. I will say it should be on the page. The page of the Second War for Armageddon also doesn't mention at all War Boss Ugulard, the orc sent by Ghazghkull to break the city and his defenders that would end up dueling Yarrick, losing and being killed in combat with the old man. And that is the reason Yarrick lost one arm. The tactics that Ghazghkull employed to try and take Hive Hades during the war are not mentioned anywhere, which is weird because he used the same tactics against Elsrich and there they worked to the point that the orcs overran the Hive in a matter of weeks. So, I will say it warrants a mention. In the wiki of the Ullanor Crusade, the entirety of the squad of Grimaldus, so Arterion, Primus, Kador, Nerovar and Bastilan, are not mentioned anywhere. Only Bayard is mentioned as a named character during the war. Always in the page of the Crusade for Elsrich, it is mentioned that 2 War-Hound Titans were sacrificed by the Legion Invigilata contingent to keep the Mega Gargant Godbreaker in place as Jurisian fired the Ordinatus Armageddon. That is not the lore, it is made up. The plan of Legion Invigilata was that they would escort Jurisian and Oberon into the city, protect it until it fired against the Mega Gargant, and then they would leave. But they were too slow to reach it before it could flatten the temple where Grimaldus and the survivors were fighting. So, the Warlord Titan Baneside sacrificed itself by pretty much running to reach Godbreaker, unloading on it to attract its attention, lure it back away from the temple into range, and allowing Oberon to hit it directly with a single shot it had to destroy it. In fact, not only Baneside is not mentioned anywhere on any wiki, but not even the Princeps of the Titan, named the Princeps Amasat, is actually mentioned anywhere. Oh look, Pio, we have reached 100 on the counter of Lexicanum Lied. We get a reward for it. I got a new virus bomb.
And what do I get?
A lawsuit from Lexicanum.
Yes, exactly what I wanted.
In the page for the Third War for Armageddon, the Hemlock River that is mentioned so often, especially in Elsrich, is not mentioned anywhere. In the Lexicanum page of the Third War for Armageddon, in the section describing the Orc Assault, High Volcanoes, Deathmire and Tempestora are not mentioned anywhere. There is no mention of the plan of Ghazghkull of throwing rocks on the planet to create orc bastions that could land anywhere on the continent of Armageddon. Lieutenant Cage, the man that ended up sacrificing himself to kill the now traitor Overlord von Strab, is not mentioned anywhere on any wiki at all. And he is the main character of the novel, also known as Annihilation Squad. And the novel itself is also not mentioned anywhere in any wiki pertaining to the Third War for Armageddon. And by reflection, the commander of Cage and the last Chancer's squad on the planet, Colonel Schaefer, is mentioned in the commanders during the Third War for Armageddon, but nothing else about him is mentioned, and he is the commander of the last Chancers both in Annihilation Squad and Armageddon Saint. The wiki page of the main officer defending Hive Toradis at the beginning of the Season of Blood, Colonel Berkant, is completely empty. And last but not least, we have two big mistakes that I take issue with. The first is that the Celestial Lions that deployed on the planet of Armageddon in full force, their entire chapter came to fight here, are not mentioned anywhere, when they are the main protagonist of the short sequel to Hell's called Blood and Fire. In fact, they are even on the thumbnail of this video. And to add insults to injury, the Battles of the Man-Named Gap, both of them, are not mentioned anywhere in the wiki of the Third War for Armageddon, when Grimaldus was involved in the second, and after almost half the chapter of the Celestial Lions got annihilated in the first. To the point that the Man-Named Gap is actually mentioned for the events of the Season of Blood, while ignoring the events involving the Celestial Lions. I think this is thinly veiled Space Marine racism on the side of Lexicanum. And this, keep in mind, is only what me and Pio actually noticed. The organization of all the wars for Armageddon on Lexicanum is a nightmare. They are divided into no less than 13 wiki pages, to the point that even Pio was going crazy, trying to track events between the official wiki and all the pages they divided the wars in. So, we probably missed a good chunk of mistakes just out of the sheer bad organization of Lexicanum. And let me raise my hands, I won't even try to correct the sources. They are so shittily organized that I give up. There are mistakes, I don't know exactly where though. There were too many that I noticed during research alone. Games Workshop seriously seems to be out of fucking ideas for Armageddon at this point. It was first invaded by Angron, then the Orcs again, and then Angron again. For the love of God, lead a new enemy to it! I would accept even an invasion of herds. Just get fucking Chaos and Orcs out of that planet!
Seeing how often this planet is covered in brutal continent-shattering wars, I'm still of the opinion that it should have been applied Exterminatus to by the fall of Cadia.
It would have been the logical solution. Wait, where is the last Pio clone that was left?
Oh, he jumped into Red Angel's Gate as it was closing. I don't know what happened to him. Wait, this is not a Slaneshi pleasure world. That bastard of Tzeentch lied. I knew I shouldn't have asked for directions to him in that warp storm.
For the love of the Emperor, it is finally done! Sorry if the video is a bit late. As you can see from the length, the quantity of research and effort for this video have been crazy. The script is over 70 pages long. By this point, we're working on it from months. You find all sources in the description as usual. I suggest strongly you go and read the original material. We couldn't put everything into this video, so there is a lot more to explore, especially of the third conflict. Hope you enjoyed the content. Next video will be interesting but short. I need a small holiday before the next big video. Remember to subscribe and support us on Patreon if you want. Thank you for watching.